Chapter 2298 Heavenly Fortress. After momentarily falling into a daze, Dragon Riders members promptly revealed ecstatic expressions on their faces. It's true. That pressure really has disappeared. Boss, if we can rest here long term, we can keep grinding in the Gravity Mountain range without returning to Dragonheart City. If that's the case, we won't need more than half a month to surpass those top 8 adventurer teams subordinate to Heaven's Blade. Previously, they had not expected much of the Northern Fortress. After all, they had visited 13 Thrones Fortress before, so they knew what purpose the Gravity Mountain Range's fortresses served. These fortresses were merely temporary rest areas. Aside from allowing players to recover stamina and concentration, they only provided materials replenishment and weapons and equipment repair. However, the Northern Fortress completely overthrew their understanding of the Gravity Mountain Range's fortresses. Setting aside accumulating the double EXP buff inside the Northern Fortress, just the fact that the fortress could remove the ever-present pressure they felt while grinding in the Gravity Mountain Range was already plenty amazing. Since the Northern Fortress had this kind of ability, they would not need to head back to Dragonheart City to relieve themselves of this pressure. Although the pressure the Gravity Mountain Range exerted on them had only a minuscule effect, long-term exposure would still build up mental fatigue, which would rise especially quickly when they were fighting against powerful monsters. Hence, even with the opportunity to rest in 13 Thrones Fortress, they would still return to Dragonheart City once every 4 or 5 days to relax and refresh their minds. At this point, it was already their 3rd day in the Gravity Mountain Range, so the mental fatigue they had accumulated was quite significant. However, the moment they entered the Northern Fortress, said mental fatigue had disappeared completely. Normally, this pleasant sensation was something they would feel only after returning to Dragonheart City. If they could rid themselves of the Gravity Mountain Range's pressure just by entering the Northern Fortress, then they could forego returning to Dragonheart City and remain in the Gravity Mountain Range. With this, they could save plenty on the travel time between the World Tower and Dragonheart City, thereby increasing their leveling speed and resource acquisition rate. In this situation, Swimming Dragon could not help being overjoyed. The Northern Fortress's benefits might not seem like much, but with persistence, a drop of water could wear out even a stone. With the help of the Northern Fortress's ability, the Dragon Riders adventurer team could slowly pull ahead of Dragonheart City's adventurer teams. Surpassing the top 8 adventurer teams subordinate to Heaven's Blade would also be a piece of cake. During the time Dragon Riders members were strolling about, enjoying the Northern Fortress's pressure-free environment, a gasp suddenly appeared in the team chat. Boss, come over here quickly. I discovered something good. A level 87 Tigerkin Shield Warrior yelled excitedly. What is it? What's so important that you need to make such a huge fuss? Swimming Dragon asked, exasperated. Dragon Riders was a well-known adventurer team on Dragonheart Island. Having one of its members act like a country bumpkin in front of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilions and Zero Wings members after entering the Northern Fortress was a huge embarrassment to the adventurer team. Boss, it's the teleportation scroll for this fortress. Return scrolls for the Northern Fortress are available at the defensive magic towers. The Tigerkin Shield Warrior replied. What? Return scrolls? Swimming Dragon's breathing momentarily grew heavier. Return scrolls for locations in the outside world were unusable inside the World Tower. Meanwhile, the Gravity Mountain Range was an extremely dangerous place, and players could enter a death zone unawares at any time. Players might be able to escape momentarily using instantaneous transfer scrolls, but without the help of a return scroll, they would still encounter countless perils on their way back to safety. If players could utilize return scrolls inside the Gravity Mountain Range, they would no longer have to be afraid of exploring unknown and dangerous regions. Moreover, with return scrolls, players would no longer have to conserve their stamina and concentration to walk back to the nearest rest area, increasing their range of operations drastically. Buy them. Buy them all quickly. It doesn't matter even if they cost 1 ancient gold each. Swimming Dragon ordered, his eyes glowing with excitement. Ancient gold might be difficult to earn, but compared to their lives, let alone 1 ancient gold, even 10 ancient gold would not be comparable. After all, even a single death at their levels would deprive them of plenty of opportunities. Boss, relax. These return scrolls are sold by NPCs. You can have as many as you want. Moreover, each return scroll costs only 10 ancient silver. However, these return scrolls are bound to the buyer and cannot be transferred to other players, the Tigerkin Shield Warrior said, grinning. What? Only 10 ancient silver? For a moment, Swimming Dragon thought he had misheard. Ordinary players might not be able to bear the price of 10 ancient silver, but this was easily affordable for experts like themselves. After all, just entering the Gravity Mountain range cost 5 ancient silver, while entering a fortress was 1 ancient silver and staying in a hotel 2 to 3 ancient silver. Following which, Swimming Dragon had everyone in his team immediately go and purchase some return scrolls at the defensive magic towers. In fact, aside from some money for accommodation and repair fees, he told his teammates to spend all their ancient silver to purchase the Northern Fortress's return scrolls, afraid that the return scrolls would become unavailable or increase in price in the future. However, what Swimming Dragon did not know was that the system handled the price for the Northern Fortress's return scrolls, which could be considered one of the special abilities of the defensive magic towers. This ability was something similar to the additional skills found on weapons and equipment. Shifeng had no say in the settings and could only collect a portion of the profits. Meanwhile, even after having his teammates spend all their spare ancient silver on return scrolls, Swimming Dragon was still not satisfied. After all, he knew that so long as they exploited this opportunity to the fullest, the Dragon Riders Adventurer team could see a qualitative leap in development. Notify everyone in the Adventurer team and have them come to the Northern Fortress. From now onwards, the Northern Fortress will be Dragon Riders' main headquarters, Swimming Dragon said. After saying so, he immediately visited 4 of the Northern Fortress's basic hotels and rented all 4 long-term for 60 ancient gold per day. He intended to have these 4 hotels serve as Dragon Riders' temporary headquarters and lodging for the Adventurer team's members. That way, members would not have to worry about accommodations and end up sleeping on the streets. Shortly after Swimming Dragon gave his command, Dragon Riders members promptly sprang into action. All 2,000+ members of the Adventurer team suddenly headed to the World Tower. The large-scale movement piqued the curiosity of many of the Adventurer teams that had close relations with Dragon Riders. Some players that were friends with Dragon Riders members also asked their friends about this situation. What are you guys trying to do? Is Dragon Riders conducting some kind of large-scale operation? It's not a large-scale operation. Our Adventurer team is just moving our main headquarters to the Northern Fortress. Are you guys insane? Didn't you hear the threat War Blood made? War Blood might be powerful, but we can simply stick to the northern region. At worst, we'll just avoid grinding in the Gravity Mountain Range's other areas. Here, let me tell you a secret. Zero Wing's Northern Fortress is freaking amazing. Not only can you accumulate the double EXP buff there, but my team leader says that you can even rid yourself of the Gravity Mountain Range's ever-present pressure by entering the Northern Fortress. What's even more amazing is that there are return scrolls on sale at the Northern Fortress. With those, even ordinary experts like us can grind freely and efficiently in the Gravity Mountain Range. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You're kidding me, right? I've been to 13 Thrones Fortress before. It's fine if you don't believe me, but once my level surpasses yours, don't say that I never told you about this. After saying so, the members of Dragon Riders hurried toward the Northern Fortress. They all wished to start competing for the Gravity Mountain Range's leveling resources as soon as possible. While the Dragon Riders Adventurer team was rushing to the Northern Fortress, information about the Northern Fortress started spreading among some of Dragonheart City's adventurer teams. Shortly after, news of it also reached Dragonheart City's major powers. Chapter 2299. Popular fortress Dragonheart City was originally already bubbling over the conflict between Zero Wing and War Blood. Hence, the city's various powers were keeping an eye out for news about the Northern Fortress. The World Tower could be said to be Dragonheart City's greatest resource. The various powers had all obtained a large number of leveling and material resources from it. Meanwhile, the Gravity Mountain Range's fortresses played a crucial role in further enhancing their resource acquisition rate. With rumors regarding the Northern Fortress's devastating abilities proliferating, Dragonheart City's various powers immediately launched an investigation to ascertain the truth. Return scrolls. Investigate. I want this information verified as soon as possible. Previously, the various powers had nothing much to say about War Blood's threat, as Warblood had also captured a fortress in the northern region and was going to open it just one day after the northern fortress opened. A one-day difference wouldn't affect their development by much. Moreover, the northern fortress's location was remote, so it wasn't particularly attractive to the various powers. At best, it could only serve as a rest area. However, things were different now. The northern fortress's return scroll would be a game-changer in the Gravity Mountain range. The difference between having a return scroll and not having one while grinding in the Gravity Mountain range was massive. Moreover, the effects would snowball as time passed. The reason the various powers had set up a base of operations in Dragonheart City was to gain better development resources. If their own profits were not affected, the various powers would show Warblood some respect and avoid provoking it as much as possible. However, it was a whole other story if conceding to Warblood's demands affected their development by a significant margin. Dragonheart City's various powers sent scouts to check out the northern fortress, which crowded the Hall of the World Tower's first underground floor. The moment the various powers' scouts entered the northern fortress, they were shocked by the fortress's environment. The high mana density and lack of mental pressure here made the northern fortress no different from Dragonheart City. It was entirely possible for players to use the northern fortress as a temporary base. With the northern fortress, they would no longer have to shuttle between the World Tower and Dragonheart City. Most importantly, the northern fortress possessed return scrolls. The price of 10 ancient silver nearly had the visiting players wondering whether they were hallucinating. After the various power scouts reported back about the situation inside the northern fortress, a huge commotion erupted in Dragonheart City. The Gravity Mountain range's resources were incomparably abundant. Until now, the various powers had yet to explore even 2/3 of the entire map. This was especially true for the ruins of the ancient civilization. These ruins contained a plethora of precious treasures. Only, due to the Gravity Mountain range's environment, exploring these ruins was still incredibly difficult, even with the help of a small fortress. Meanwhile, although the northern fortress was in a remote area, it perfectly solved the hindrance to staying in the Gravity Mountain range long-term. This meant that guild members could start exploring the various ancient ruins with much greater efficiency than before and secure even more resources for themselves. Their exploration progress might even surpass that of 13 Thrones, which possessed a small fortress. Notify everyone immediately. We're shifting our guild's base of operations on Dragonheart Island to the northern fortress. But what about Warblood? Screw them. This is an opportunity for our guild. We'll kill anybody that stands in our way. Less than an hour after the various powers based in Dragonheart City verified the rumors regarding the northern fortress, many started sending a large number of experts there lest other powers get ahead of them. After all, the northern fortress was only a medium fortress. Unlike a city, a medium fortress could accommodate only a very limited number of players. The number of hotels in a fortress was especially limited. Not resting in a hotel would severely impact players' recovery speed. Moreover, according to the powers' investigations, the northern fortress's hotels could even hasten the double EXP buff's accumulation rate. The difference between having a hotel to rest in and not having one would drastically affect their leveling speed. Meanwhile, over at the Gravity Mountain Range's northern fortress, the sudden influx of players made the fortress bustle. Big Sis Rain, according to our latest statistics, over 150,000 players have visited the northern fortress thus far, and estimates state that we should hit the 400,000 mark by the end of today, Blue Phoenix reported excitedly as she approached Phoenix Rain. Back when 13 Thrones had successfully captured a fortress, despite the huge commotion in Dragonheart City, the fortress had managed to attract only around 200,000 visitors on its first day. Meanwhile, the fortress had a player population of only 700,000, which was also the maximum capacity of a small fortress. In comparison, the northern fortress was expected to attract over 400,000 visitors on the opening day alone. It would most likely take only 2 or 3 days to exceed the 700,000 threshold. Reaching the maximum capacity of 1,500,000 players was only a matter of time. It should be known that even with just a 700,000 player population, 13 Thrones' small fortress generated tons of wealth and resources every day. Although Blue Phoenix did not know how much the small fortress was earning exactly, according to the investigations of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion spies, The fortress's daily income was at least 5,000 ancient gold and 600,000 ancient silver. Once the northern fortress's player population reached maximum capacity, one could easily imagine how much income it would generate. Moreover, the northern fortress had many more sources of revenue than 13 Thrones' small fortress. Even though Phoenix Rain held only 20% of the northern fortress's shares, the income she would receive could rival half of a small fortress's total income at the very least. Half. Even Starlink did not receive half of the income from 13 Thrones' small fortress. At that time, who would dare question Phoenix Rain's position in the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion? I'm afraid that even Warblood and Starlink did not expect such an outcome. When Phoenix Rain looked at the statistics report in her hand, she could not help but sigh ruefully. Previously, even after successfully capturing the northern fortress, she had still felt that Shifeng had gone overboard with his actions in the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's residence. Now, however, it would seem that the one to regret their actions would not be Zero Wing, but Warblood instead. The northern fortress's future was already clear for all to see. Once a sufficient number of players gathered and the northern fortress was in full operation, it would be impossible for Warblood to exhaust and destroy Zero Wing in the Sea of Death. After all, the disparity in the incomes of the two sides would be simply too massive. Aside from Phoenix Rain, Dragonheart City's various superpowers were entertaining such thoughts as well. Although Warblood had captured the Rock Nest Fortress, the difference between that and the northern fortress was far too massive. With this, Warblood had backed itself into a corner. After all, Warblood had previously declared that it would ban all those who entered the northern fortress from the Rock Nest Fortress. Now the players that were originally planning on resting at the Rock Nest Fortress would not dare approach the fortress at all. A situation that would definitely reduce the Rock Nest Fortress's income. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. While the various powers were paying attention to the northern fortress, Shifeng was hustling in the northern fortress. Not only did he have to reorganize the northern fortress's construction plans, due to the explosive increase in player population, but he also had to deal with the partnership offers and shop purchase requests from the various powers. Guild leader, the Fong family's people have visited our main headquarters and stated that they wish to meet you, Gentle Snow, who was currently organizing the information on the northern fortress's shops, said, a grim expression on her face. Previously, due to her personal matters, Shifeng had stepped forward to provoke the Fong family, the number one family in Fonglin City, which possessed extraordinary influence in the city. The fact that the Fong family was paying Zero Wing a visit now definitely wasn't good news for the guild. The Fong family? Shifeng nodded. Let's go meet them then. Chapter 2300, Clash with the Fong family. Zero Wing's main headquarters, top floor reception room. 4 people waited in the reception room, and the atmosphere was unusually depressing. Xiao Yu, who acted as the receptionist, wore a particularly ugly expression. Xiao Yu's reaction to the middle-aged man was the cause of the atmosphere in the room. The older gentleman wore gray martial artist robes and loomed like a mountain. His aura was also quite oppressive. However, his physical presence wasn't the only reason for Xiao Yu's reaction. His identity was the true reason. The middle-aged man was the current head of the Fong family and the chairman of the Qilin Corporation, Fong Zhenyun. The Qilin Corporation might not be on the same level as the Five States Corporation, but it was one of the first-rate corporations in the country. It was also why the Fong family stood at the top among Fonglin City's powerful families. Fong Zhenyun wished he could destroy the Big Dipper group with a word. Why wouldn't Xiao Yu be afraid with such an important individual before him? Fong Zhenyun was a true mogul in the business world, nothing like the youngsters that had inherited their family's businesses. A young man and woman accompanied Fong Zhenyun in the room. The young man was none other than Fong Mingyu, the Fong family's strongest expert of the younger generation. On the other hand, Xiao Yu didn't recognize the young woman with long wavy hair and wearing a bright red dress. However, he knew she must be of high status, considering that she visited Zero Wing's headquarters alongside Fong Zhenyun. As Xiao Yu wondered why a VIP like Fong Zhenyun would visit Zero Wing's headquarters, the reception room's doors opened and Shifeng by Qingxue and Lei Bao entered. Fong Mingyu's indifferent expression vanished the moment he saw Shifeng. Even Xiao Yu could see the fear in the large man's eyes. However, Fong Mingyu's gaze also contained a trace of killing intent. Xiao Yu found the man's reaction reasonable after giving the matter some thought. Fang Mingyu was the Fang family's prided genius, yet Shi Feng had subdued him with a single move in the Redstone restaurant. To make matters worse, Fenglin City's upper society frequently visited the Redstone restaurant, and they wouldn't miss the news of Fang Mingyu's miserable defeat. I had my doubts about Mingyu's claim, but looking at you now, it seems he had been correct. You're both courageous and strong. I'm afraid none among the younger generation is a match for you, Fang Jinyun said, a trace of shock flashing in his eyes as he examined Shi Feng. Gentle Snow, who had already been worried about this visit, began to panic when she saw Fang Jinyun. She had never expected him to visit Zero Wing personally. Mr. Fang's praise is too generous. May I know what business the Fang family has with me today? Shi Feng asked, getting straight to the point. The Fang family only enjoyed its current status today due to Old Man Fang Jinyuan's father. And yet, Fang Jinyuan exposed the fact that he was also a neutralizing grandmaster, which meant the Fang family had two such individuals. When Xiao Yu heard Lei Bao's statement, he was just as stunned. With two neutralizing grandmasters, it had enough influence to force the various families, dojos and training centers in Fenglin City to obey its every command, regardless of the rest of the Fang family's martial prowess. Fang Mingyu, who reclined on a sofa, sneered at Shi Feng. Everyone had assumed the Fang family's rise was due to his grandfather. They also believed that once his grandfather reached his 101st birthday, the family would crumble. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. However, the public didn't realize that the Fang family's foundations had grown since his grandfather had led the family. If they hadn't, his grandfather would never have passed control of the family to his father, Fang Jinyun. Fang Mingyu acknowledged that he was no match for Shi Feng, but the tricks Shi Feng had played against him wouldn't work with his father. When he faced his father, Fang Mingyu didn't even have the heart to resist. He had no hope of contending with his father's inhuman fitness in a direct confrontation. How can I know if I don't try? Shi Feng nonchalantly replied. Good. Let me see if you're as strong as you claim. Fang Jinyuan's fist then shot toward Shi Feng with exceptional speed and grace. Chapter 2301. Rivaling a grandmaster so fast. Lei Bao's expression turned sour as he watched Fang Jinyuan move. He hadn't expected the man to attack without hesitation. Fang Jinyuan had none of the magnanimity of a martial arts grandmaster. Fang Jinyuan's punch was so fast that the human body had practically no time to react. Come. However, Shi Feng had reacted as Fang Jinyuan's fist had begun to move. Neutralizing grandmaster's mental processing speed was far faster than an ordinary human's. Their sensitivity to danger was easily 10 times sharper than an ordinary person's as well. They could sense an incoming attack before the enemy even moved, which was why neutralizing grandmasters were so frightening. Since this was his first time fighting a neutralizing grandmaster in the real world, Shi Feng decided to greet the hit with a punch of his own, rather than dodge. Like Fang Jinyuan's punch, Shi Feng lacked any flowery movements. It was standard textbook punch. Suicidal bastard. Fang Mingyu could not help but grin as he watched. Fang Mingyu had recognized that Shi Feng was weaker than he was during their clash in the Redstone restaurant, not to mention his father. His father might be old, but thanks to modem technology like the life potion, he maintained his peak condition even at his age. In fact, Fang Jinyuan's body wouldn't even begin to deteriorate for another 2 decades. The fact that Shi Feng chose to face the hit head-on was suicidal. Boom. As the two fists collided, the air between them compressed and shattered, the shockwave cracking the marble ground beneath them. The room shook slightly and even Bai Qingxue stumbled backward. After the clash, Shi Feng and Fang Jinyun took a step back, the ground under their feet slightly sunken. How is this possible? Fang Mingyu stared at Shi Feng with wide, shocked eyes when he saw the younger man completely unharmed from the exchange. 10 days ago, Shi Feng had been weaker than he was, yet now Shi Feng had taken his father's punch without suffering any damage. He stopped it. The outcome greatly shocked Lei Bao as well. He knew that Shi Feng was a neutralizing grandmaster, but Fang Jinyun had walked this path for decades now. Regardless of when he had become a neutralizing grandmaster, his fitness was inhuman. Shi Feng should have no hope of matching the older man in this regard. Moreover, Fang Jinyuan's punch had been out of this world. Lei Bao was sure that if he had tried to take that hit head-on, he would have either died or been severely injured. In truth, even Shi Feng was relatively surprised. He hadn't considered that he'd improve so massively after his training in the Tower of Four Gods. Not only had his fitness rapidly improved, but he had also substantially increased his control. He had successfully implemented some of the sword's transmigration's principles in his punch, diverting a portion of Fang Zhenyuan's strength downward. This was why he had been able to face that hit without injury. If this fight had taken place after Shi Feng had just broken through to the Grandmaster realm, he would have definitely taken damage from Fang Zhenyuan's punch. Is this the strength of neutralizing Grandmasters? Bai Qingxue thought as she gazed down at the shattered floor and felt the stifling auras radiating off of Shi Feng and Fang Zhenyuan. This seemed more like a fight between mechanical beasts, rather than a fight between humans. It was no wonder why Fenglin City's various families were so afraid of the Fang family. Meanwhile, Shi Feng and Fang Zhenyuan didn't continue to fight after exchanging hits. Instead, they took a moment to observe each other in silence. Excellent. To reach such a standard at such an age, it's no wonder why you're so confident, Fang Zhenyuan said as he calmly watched Shi Feng. Smiling, he continued, however, how long do you think you can protect Zero Wing by yourself? You know that more than one organization is targeting Zero Wing. Partnering with the Fang family is your best option. Zero Wing can only contend with these organizations with the Fang family's resources and strength. If you refuse, only death will await you. You don't need to concern yourself with such matters, Mr. Fang, Shi Feng said. Zero Wing will take care of its own. Zero Wing had already grown powerful enough that not even first-rate guilds were a match for it. Yet as luck would have it, Zero Wing didn't have a powerful background. It was only natural that other organizations would have set their sights on the guild. It was why Shi Feng was trying to accelerate the Heaven's Rumble Training Center's development. However, he hadn't thought that a power like the Fang family would try to annex Zero Wing so soon. Is that so? Fang Zhenyuan laughed. I hope you can keep this kind of confidence when the time comes. Fang Zhenyuan then turned and left the reception room, showing no intention of trying to persuade Shi Feng further. Fang Mingyu and the girl in the red dress stood from their seats, following after the older man. After leaving Zero Wing's main headquarters and climbing into his luxury car, Fang Zhenyuan turned to the young woman, who had remained silent, with a serious expression. Shirhan, I'll contact Fenglin City's dojos and training centers later. I'll leave Heaven's Rumble's virtual combat platform to you, Fang Zhenyuan said coldly. With your position in mythology, you should have no problem suppressing a guild like Zero Wing, correct? If a guild wished to develop in God's domain, it needed sufficient manpower. Heaven's Rumble had attracted quite a few talented fighters with the virtual platform it had set up, and as long as they dealt with the platform, Zero Wing's development in the game would stagnate. Once they had suppressed Zero Wing from every angle, it would only be a matter of time before Shi Feng submitted to the Fang family. Of course, mythology is one of the top 5 super guilds of God's domain. However, mythology is based on the Western continent, and there's no connection between the East and West continents yet. It's not possible to connect to Easter players' data via the virtual combat platform yet. I'll need some time before I can lead a team to the Eastern continent, the red-dressed girl named Fang Shirhan said, smiling. Once we cross over, we'll trample over Zero Wing's experts. Guilds on the 2 continents have different areas of focus, and the difference between combat standards is massive. All right. I'll leave the situation to you. Mingyu will help you where he can, Fang Zhenyuan said, nodding. After Fang Zhenyuan's group had left, an uproar rose in Zero Wing's headquarters. Zero Wing's members knew about the conflict between the guild and the Fang family. Shi Feng had caused quite the scene in the Redstone restaurant after all, and as a result, the situation with the Fang family weighed on everyone's minds. Since the Fang family had left without achieving anything, Zero Wing's players breathed a sigh of relief. Hallmaster, now that the Fang family has revealed that it has 2 neutralizing grandmasters, Fenglin City's dojos and training centers will side with the family. Some of the dojos and training centers we've signed partnership agreements with will likely pull out of the deals. I'm afraid that it won't be possible to recruit a large number of talented combatants quickly, Xiaoyu said. Moreover, the Fang family will most likely work with other dojos and training centers to compete with our pricing. If they don't want to work with us, so be it. Our priority is to set up more virtual combat platforms, so I want you to try to set up some small-scale training centers around the city, Shi Feng replied. He too understood the influence the Fong family would command with two neutralizing grandmasters. Furthermore, the Fong family had the Qilin Corporation's support. Zero Wing was utterly outmatched when it came to strength and financial resources. However, the virtual combat platform would become the mainstream platform for combat in the future. As long as the Heaven's Rumble Training Center developed its virtual combat platforms, it had some chance of competing with the Fong family. Developing the platforms won't be a problem, but with our current finances, setting up the training centers will be, Xiaoyu said helplessly. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Although Zero Wing had recently earned quite a few credits through Stone Forest Town, setting up a large enough virtual combat platform would cost a lot of money. The setup for a platform in the training center was already a huge burden on Zero Wing's finances. Trying to set up more was simply unrealistic. Relax. Zero Wing is quite rich right now, Shifeng said, smiling. I'll start searching for suitable locations then, Xiaoyu said, his eyes glowing with excitement upon hearing Shifeng's response. If they had sufficient capital, Heaven's Rumble wouldn't have to worry about its development even without Fenglin City's various dojos and training centers. After discussing the training center's future with Xiaoyu, Shifeng returned to God's domain. Other guilds might struggle to earn money in God's domain at this stage of the game, but that wasn't an issue for Zero Wing, especially after capturing the northern fortress. After all, the Gravity Mountain Range was becoming a hub for various wealthy powers. Chapter 2302, Renting Shops. Gravity Mountain Range, Northern Fortress. As soon as Shifeng came online, he was greeted by the sight of a very busy street. As he walked through the city streets, he saw large groups of guild players running toward the fortress's hotels, reserving all of the rooms and turning them into temporary residences for their guilds. At this point, the northern fortress was just as prosperous as an ordinary city. Shifeng could already tell that the northern fortress would become the center of attention in the Gravity Mountain Range. Meanwhile, independent players crowded outside of Zero Wing's residence, eager to apply to join the guild. They all wanted to take advantage of the benefits the guild's residence offered, and because of this, Blackie and the others were swamped with work. Guild leader, you're back. When Aqua Rose, who was busy organizing documents in the guild leader's office, noticed Shifeng enter the room, she worriedly asked, "How did the matter with the Fong family go?" Although she wasn't in Fenglin City, she was aware of the Fong family's position there. Zero Wing had just established itself in Fenglin City, and if the Fong family decided to target the guild, it would affect Zero Wing's in-game development and in the real world, especially now that the various guilds understood the importance of dojos and training centers. Many large guilds in God's domain had already partnered with dojos and training centers by this point, with some guilds even opening their own. With a dojo or training center, not only could they nurture their own talented individuals, but they could also recruit new players to bolster their strength. With the country's various training centers and dojos allying themselves with God's domain's large guilds, Zero Wing would have a difficult time establishing itself in new cities. Hence, Zero Wing would have to rely on the Heaven's Rumble Training Center in Fenglin City to pump new blood into the guild. Everything's fine. Negotiations to purchase Zero Wing simply broke down, Shifeng said, waving his hand. Isn't that really bad? Shifeng's nonchalant attitude exasperated Aqua Rose. The Fong family owns the Qilin Corporation and is based in Fenglin City. The Fong family won't have any trouble targeting us. All it would need to do is contact Fenglin City's dojos and training centers and instruct them to compete with our prices. If that happens, nobody will visit the Heaven's Rumble Training Center. The Heaven's Rumble Training Center was Zero Wing's main source of new talented players right now. If nobody visited the training center, Zero Wing wouldn't have anyone new to recruit. Moreover, the Fong family could easily afford to poach Heaven's Rumble's new members by offering them a high payout. Not only would the Fong family cut off Zero Wing's supply of new blood, but the Heaven's Rumble would become a burden on Zero Wing's finances as well. Keeping the training center open every day cost a huge sum of money. Relax. Zero Wing isn't the same guild it used to be. The Fong family overestimates itself if it thinks it can annex us, Shifeng said, chuckling. How is the construction for the fortress's shops coming along? They're done, but if we only rent the shops, we won't be able to earn much. As a medium fortress, the northern fortress can only accommodate so many players at once. Aqua Rose reported. Very few powers visiting the fortress have expressed any interest in the shops. Most people are asking to rent the hotels long-term instead. The various major powers were typically quite interested in obtaining shops, but only if there was enough traffic. It would likely be quite difficult to rent the fortress's shops for a high price with the northern fortress's maximum player population. Furthermore, the number of shops in the fortress couldn't compare to those in a guild city. Based on God's domain settings, fortresses could only house a limited number of shops. A small fortress only had room for 100 shops, while a medium fortress could contain 240 shops. In comparison, a basic city could easily hold more than 1,000 shops. As long as they're done, I'm satisfied, Shifeng said, chuckling. See to the necessary preparations and announce that the northern fortress will begin to lease its shops. The bid for each shop will start at 5 million credits per month, and will only lease 200 shops in total. First come, first served. Guild leader Yu. Aqua Rose stared at Shifeng as if he had gone mad. If they couldn't even lease Zero Wing City's shops for 5 million credit per month, how were they supposed to rent those in the northern fortress, which had less than 500,000 players right now? And Shifeng's high price was only the starting bid. Just get it done. When the time comes, you'll understand, Shifeng said, not bothering to explain further. Fortresses in neutral maps were far more profitable than guild cities in God's domain. Guild towns and cities couldn't be constructed in many neutral maps due to their environments, and players would have to rely on fortresses to rest. Most of God's domain's players were also independent players, and when they obtained items they didn't need, they almost always sold them in their favored rest areas. Naturally, shops were the best platform for guilds to purchase and store these items, especially the items that couldn't be stored in one's bag space. Aside from purchasing and storing materials and items, neutral fortresses' shops had a hidden benefit. They could conduct transactions with wandering merchant NPCs and purchase specialty items. Wandering merchants would visit a neutral fortress as long as it had enough security, and these NPCs frequently conducted business with individual players and shops. However, wandering merchants would only offer to sell their specialty items to shops. One such specialty item was the Advanced Wanderer's Camp. With this item, a team could set up a temporary resting area in a neutral map. Although each Advanced Wanderer's Camp could only be used 3 times, and each use had a 1-day duration, it would help a team fully recover their stamina and concentration without cutting their exploration short to return to a city or fortress. The Advanced Wanderer's Camp was an absolute treasure to exploration teams. Sometimes, if players were lucky, they would even encounter wandering merchants that were interested in selling super rare mini-mobile camp. Unlike the Advanced Wanderer's Camp, the mini-mobile camp was permanent. It could only accommodate 100 players at a time, but a team could use it indefinitely. It only cost a few magic crystals for each activation. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The smallest fortress wandering merchant NPCs would visit was a medium fortress, which was why the various powers had fought so desperately to capture neutral medium fortresses and larger during Shifeng's previous life. Every neutral medium fortress was a gold mine and definitely worth waging a war to acquire. To increase their chances of developing in neutral maps, the various powers wouldn't spare any cost when renting a fortress's shops. As long as one owned a medium fortress or larger in a neutral map, they wouldn't have to worry about needing a source of income, especially if that fortress was the northern fortress. Currently, it was the only fortress in the Gravity Mountain range that had return scrolls, and there were plenty of unexplored ruins in the Gravity Mountain range. Zero Wing wouldn't need to worry about no one renting the fortress's shops. After verifying Shifeng's instructions, Aqua Rose informed the public that the northern fortress's shops were available for rent. Chapter 2303. Beginning of turmoil. When news of the northern fortress's shops availability went public, the various major powers that had already shifted their bases to the fortress heard about it immediately. No power would turn down the opportunity to own a fortress's shop, especially one in the northern fortress. At this point, the northern fortress was almost guaranteed to become the heart of the Gravity Mountain range. The various superpowers might capture the map's other fortresses, even one of the 2 remaining medium fortresses, but they weren't likely to secure a fortress as popular as the northern fortress. The northern fortress had already begun to build its advantages, while none of the others had been captured yet. However, before Dragonheart Island's various powers could focus on the Northern Fortress's shops, a system announcement reached every player in the game. System announcement. A player has triggered an epic main storyline quest and activated the new expansion pack, Invasion of Other Planes. Planar passages connecting to other worlds will begin to open in 3 hours. Every player on the God's Domain continent was stunned, not to mention the players on Dragonheart Island. After a dazed moment, they were all ecstatic. Everyone knew that other worlds were resource treasure troves, but it wasn't easy to enter an otherworld. It was wonderful news that passages to multiple otherworlds were about to open. Guild leader, this is wonderful. With these planar passages, we won't have to worry about securing level 100 weapons and equipment anymore. Aqua Rose exclaimed. Zero Wing had a better understanding of otherworlds' available resources than other powers. Take the Ice Crystal World, for example. The Ice Crystal World possessed various unique materials and superior forging techniques. The guild had earned a fortune by exploiting these advantages. Unfortunately, when the teleportation gate to the Ice Crystal World had opened in Lake Heart City, Zero Wing's income from the otherworld had significantly decreased. This system announcement regarding the planar passages was undoubtedly good news for Zero Wing. How did this happen so soon? In contrast to Aqua Rose's reaction, Shifeng's expression turned gloomy when he heard the system announcement. The planar passage's activation would bring an abundance of rare resources to God's Domain's main continent, but it would also bring trouble. The flood of new players to the continent would be one of the biggest problems. Many players resided in other worlds, and once these planar passages began to open, those players could travel between the main continent and the other worlds as well. Because of this, these otherworlds players would surge to the main continent in droves, as would many new powers. Competition on the main continent was already intense. It was easy to imagine what kind of outcome God's Domain would see if a large number of new competitors suddenly joined the fray. Even now, Shifeng could clearly remember what had happened when the planar passages had opened during his previous life. A massive change had rocked God's Domain's various powers, with countless powers perishing during the invasion. Not even superpowers had been spared. Although other worlds were small, only half the size of a kingdom, their player standards differed due to the otherworld's environments. Some otherworld players were weaker than those on the main continent, while others were stronger. The Ice Crystal World was average among the multitude of otherworlds. In some of the stronger otherworlds, players had no issues obtaining legacies, while others made it easier for players to convert to stronger races. These players tended to have greater combat power and higher levels than those on the main continent. Zero Wing had just recently become a pseudo-superpower and had yet to reinforce its foundations. Dealing with these otherworld players and powers wouldn't help Zero Wing. As far as Shifeng could remember, many players had already risen to Tier 3 when the planar passages had activated in the past. Since this expansion had been triggered so early in this life, the competition between players would become even more intense than he remembered. Back then, the main continent's powers had already solidified their rule in level 100+ neutral maps. Attempting to dethrone them had been an incredibly difficult task. However, players hadn't claimed the level 100+ neutral maps in this life yet, and once the otherworld players and powers arrived on the continent, the competition for these maps would grow to unprecedented levels. I need to move forward with my plans. Shifeng gritted his teeth as he examined at Zero Wing's current statistics. After giving the matter some thought, he turned to Aqua Rose and commanded, Aqua, notify the management in Zero Wing City and tell them to only accept credits in the shops. Also, we need to expand and recruit throughout the Dark Knight Empire. The planar passages would open all over the main continent. If Zero Wing wanted to survive the upcoming war, it needed to increase its overall strength as soon as possible. Shifeng hadn't wanted to expand the guild too quickly originally. More guild members meant higher costs for the guild, and if Zero Wing couldn't afford the new expenditures, the guild's development would regress. Thus, Shifeng had decided to slow the guild's expansion, allowing Zero Wing to develop organically, unlike powers that rapidly increased their member count. Unfortunately, he couldn't afford to wait with the planar passages about to open. The gears of a new era had already begun to turn. If Zero Wing didn't have enough manpower, others would easily invade and usurp its territories, especially now that the Fong family had decided to target the Heaven's Rumble Training Center. Having received her orders, Aqua Rose quickly contacted the players that managed Zero Wing City, informing them that the guild would only accept credits as payment in its shops. Shi Feng also instructed Aqua Rose to find a method to recruit more secret silver guards with the growth potential to nearly rival fine gold rank. He currently possessed quite a bit of soul essence on him, which he could use to increase personal guards' growth potential. Although he could also use the soul essence on the guild's fine gold guards, it wasn't so easy to collect. Even after slaying all of the monsters in the northern fortress, he had only acquired 90 drops. With so little, he'd only be able to upgrade a few fine gold guards. Rather, he could upgrade a large number of secret silver guards with high growth potential to fine gold rank. Although there was only one rank between secret silver and fine gold guards, the difference between them was akin to the difference between peak experts and apex experts. If he could acquire a large group of level 100 plus fine gold guards at this stage of the game, he'd have a mobile killing machine. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Shi Feng also intended to use the 2 remaining teleportation tokens to send Fire Dance, Gentle Snow, Violet Cloud, and Aqua Rose to train in the Tower of Four Gods. Zero Wing had more than 100 Refinement Realm experts and barely any peak experts. It was the guild's fatal flaw. As players started to reach level 100 and the system removed their restrictions, the difference between experts' combat standards would grow as well. It would become a lot more challenging to make up for that difference by relying on basic attributes. It was absolutely crucial that Zero Wing nurture more peak experts as quickly as possible. Once Shi Feng had handled these affairs, the sound of another system notification reached his ears. System announcement: planar passages have opened. Players can now visit their local planar passage to travel between worlds. Chapter 2304, Planar Passages activated. Star Moon Kingdom, Star Moon City. Players flowed in and out of the lively teleportation hall. Merchant players and well-known adventurer teams from other kingdoms and empires were a common sight in and around the building. Although Star Moon City wasn't as prosperous as White River City, as Star Moon Kingdom's transit hub and the closest city to the Ore Empire in the kingdom, many players frequented the city. Star Moon City was already a large city with more than 9 million player residents. It was above average among God's Domain's various capital cities. Suddenly, a group of players with dark marks on their foreheads arrived in the teleportation hall. When the other players in the hall noticed them, they fell silent. Every one of these 100-plus players had reached level 92 or 93. Right now, the highest-leveled player on the kingdom's ranking list was only level 88. Moreover, the experts in the area felt a powerful pressure from the group of strangers as if they stood before a small force of high-level great lords. The combined aura could even deter Refinement Realm experts from approaching. There sure are a lot of people here, Commander, but their levels are pretty low. They clearly haven't received a god's blessing either, a level 92 female ranger commented as she watched the players in the teleportation hall. It seems the main continent's players haven't developed as quickly as those in the shadow world. Only their weapons and equipment are better than ours. Apparently, different areas have varying degrees of development. This is an opportunity for our shadowless adventurer team. Obviously, weapons and equipment are easier to obtain here. We were lucky to find the planar passage in our world so quickly. We should take time to secure a foothold here first, the bald, level 93 youth in black said as he led the group. Star Moon Kingdom is the perfect place for shadowless to establish on the main continent. I want you to investigate the powers in this kingdom. If they're not willing to submit, we'll get rid of them. The 100-plus players promptly split up, and every other player who had overheard the bald youth's order began to panic. Meanwhile, otherworld players began to arrive in the main continent's various kingdoms and empires, intensifying the chaos on the main continent. While otherworld players began to flood the main continent, something surprising occurred in the Gravity Mountain Range's northern fortress. Shi Feng had estimated that it would take some time to lease out the fortress's shops. It would be a while before players discovered the benefits of a medium fortress's shops after all. However, in less than a day, Dragonheart Island's various powers had claimed over 100 shops for themselves. Although these powers didn't plan to rent the shops long-term, only agreeing to the first month, it instantly earned Shi Feng over 600 million credits. Including the income from Zero Wing City, he had a total of 800 million credits on hand. Once the credits were in his account, Shifeng instructed Xiaoyu to move forward with their agreed plans. They might not be able to establish many large-scale training centers in Fenglin City, but 7 or 8 small training centers wouldn't be a problem. Furthermore, the branch training centers' main purpose was to promote the virtual combat platform and encourage the city's players to train in the Heaven's Rumble training center habitually. Hence, they wouldn't need to purchase a lot of equipment for the branch locations. Once the branches opened to the public and with Zero Wing's fame, they wouldn't need to worry about a lack of God's domain players visiting Heaven's Rumble. This would also allow Zero Wing to recruit fresh blood in God's domain. Shifeng had also earned a lot of ancient gold from the northern fortress. Normally, a small fortress at its peak would only earn 4,000 or 5,000 ancient gold per day, and small fortresses that had recently opened to the public would be lucky to earn 1,000 per day. Fortunately, the northern fortress was unimaginably popular. The various powers players already filled every hotel in the fortress. To reserve every room in a hotel, players would have to pay with ancient gold, not ancient copper or silver. Naturally, Zero Wing's share of the profits would consist of ancient gold as well. After a single day of business, Zero Wing had earned 7,000 ancient gold from the northern fortress, and that was after splitting the profits with Phoenix Rain. As more time passed and more players visited the fortress, Zero Wing would be able to upgrade its facilities. As basic hotels became advanced hotels, Zero Wing and the Phoenix Pavilion would earn even more ancient gold. Warblood's people would have a heart attack if they saw our profits, guild leader, Blackie said, laughing as he watched the northern fortress's profits increase. It won't be long before our guild secures a foothold in Dragonheart City. With more guild members here, I'd like to see Warblood interfere with our development. Blackie, don't underestimate Warblood. The adventurer team has captured its own fortress and it still has Starlink's support. It would be unwise to underestimate its development, and Warblood's naval prowess is particularly impressive. Even 13 Thrones watches its step around the adventurer team, Yan Tianxing solemnly warned his companion. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU resources were important for competing guilds, but the deciding factor would come down to the size of one's fist. Warblood might not be a match for Zero Wing in the Gravity Mountain range, but in the Sea of Death, Zero Wing would be at its mercy. Unfortunately, there were more resources available in the Sea of Death than in the Gravity Mountain range. Tianxing is right. Now that we have resources, we need to convert them into combat power. Shifeng nodded. He then retrieved the Storm speedboat design from his bag and handed it to Yan Tianxing, who would supervise the speedboat's production. They would use the profits they had earned from the northern fortress to acquire the necessary materials. Fortunately, Shifeng had been stocking up on these materials for a while. When Yan Tianxing saw the Storm speedboat design, his eyes nearly fell out of their sockets. Although he was not a naval player, he had learned how valuable bronze speedboats were during the several weeks he had spent grinding in the Sea of Death. If Zero Wing had a full fleet of bronze speedboats, they could explore the Sea of Death unhindered. Once he had set Yan Tianxing with everything he needed for the Storm speedboat's production, Shifeng left the northern fortress. Once he emerged from the World Tower, he used a return scroll to teleport to White River City. He was finally prepared to challenge his Tier 3 promotion quest. Chapter 2305, Tier 3 Promotion Quest, Starmoon Kingdom, White River City's Library. Following a level 180 Tier 3 Templar Knight, Shifeng arrived before the Starmoon Hall on the library's top floor. As he entered the hall and spotted Charlene, who wore luxurious red robes and sat in her throne on the far end of the room, something surprised Shifeng. Now he could sense a trace of divine might from Charlene, and it was nothing like the divine might items radiated. Although it wasn't as strong as the divine might from items gods had used, it was incredibly pure. The closer he got to the woman, the stronger the pressure felt. Even with his powerful basic attributes, Shifeng couldn't step within 10 yards of Charlene. He suspected she was already more powerful than demigods. You're here. Looking at you, I assume you intend to challenge your Tier 3 promotion. Am I correct? Charlene asked, giving Shifeng a natural human-like smile. She looked at him like an old friend. That's right. Shifeng nodded. He might be quite powerful, even enough to give the various superpowers a huge headache, But to truly contend with the superpowers he had to reach Tier 3 at the very least. Once he was a Tier 3 player he could freely explore level 100 plus maps and qualify to become a lord, gaining full rights to manage a territory. As true lords, players could gain full control over the land they had earned. Their authority would no longer be limited to a town or city. Not only would they have the authority to slay anyone they wished within their territory, but they could also hire NPC soldiers to protect the area and remove intruders. This would make it a lot easier to harvest resources within one's territory. Zero Wing had the strength to protect its assets, but it couldn't contend with the various superpowers in the fields. Even an ordinary superpower had countless experts under its command, and Zero Wing would need more time before it could rival these superpowers in that regard. There were only so many level 100 plus neutral maps in God's domain, and once players reached level 100, the various superpowers would begin to take their territories seriously. They would no longer be as peaceful. Shifeng's only option was to become a lord. Once he had that status, not only would Zero Wing's ability to protect itself increase by tenfold, but the guild's development speed would also undergo a qualitative transformation. Since you've already prepared, I won't waste your time, Charlene said, smiling. She extended a hand toward Shifeng and continued, 300 mana stones and 20 units of 7 luminaries crystal. Shifeng's lips twitched when he heard Charlene's price. This was daylight robbery. Since his Tier 3 promotion quest's mana stone cost had been so high, he had prepared over 300 mana stones before revisiting Charlene. Fortunately, he had also prepared 30 units of 7 luminaries crystals just in case. And of course, Charlene casually demanded 90% of the mana stones and 7 luminaries crystals he had on hand. Here. Shifeng growled, gritting his teeth. In the end he had no choice but to hand the items over. Tier 3 was a huge turning point for players and he was a Blade Saint. His wouldn't be an ordinary promotion quest. He couldn't exactly avoid challenging the quest due to the cost. Not bad. This should just be enough to support the magic array's activation, Charlene said, smiling as she received the mana stones and 7 luminaries crystals. However, I must warn you that you'll be heading to a special location. The dangers you will encounter there are beyond your imagination. Even a true Tier 3 being would struggle to survive. How much you accomplish will be entirely up to you. Charlene began to chant an incantation, and a threefold magic array appeared in the center of the hall. Gradually, a set of pitch-black doors began to appear, and Shifeng's knees nearly buckled under the door's horrific pressure. I'm not going to a level 100 neutral map to find my lost legacy? Shifeng frowned as he watched the spatial tear form between the black doors. The Tier 3 promotion quest wouldn't be like the previous promotion quests. Since the various kingdoms and empires lacked Tier 3 legacies, players would have to search ancient ruins in level 100 plus neutral maps for them. Not even peak legacies were exempt from the process. However, it was clear that he wouldn't be visiting some level 100 neutral map on the main continent. The unexpected development interfered with his plans. His past experiences and knowledge about Tier 3 promotion quests would be useless. Shifeng didn't give the matter much thought, however, as he approached the black doors. These doors wouldn't remain for long, and if they disappeared before he entered the spatial tear, the system would deem the promotion quest a failure. Not only would he have wasted a ton of valuable resources, but he'd also have to wait a long time before he could attempt the promotion quest again. The moment Shifeng stepped into the spatial tear, he transformed into a streak of light, vanishing from the large hall. He had no idea how long he had been stuck in the space-time tunnel, but when he reopened his eyes he found himself on a huge island floating in an endless void. The island was barren and quiet, containing multiple spatial tears that had enough power to tear a mythic monster to shreds. The island's environment was a complete mess. Shifeng constantly felt some berserk energy assault his body, causing damage and limiting his perception. A void land? Shifeng was speechless as he examined his surroundings. A void land was a land of death in God's domain. Even a domain realm expert would be as weak as a noob when subjected to a void land's environment, barely able to exhibit any of their combat power. When he spotted the island's level 100 plus void creatures, a chill crawled down his spine. Void worm. Void creature, Great Lord. Level 101 HP 120 000/120 000 to Void Viper. Void Creature Grand Lord. Level 102 HP 300 000/300 000 Void creatures had extremely high resistance to physical and magical damage. Normally, even Tier 3 players would have to work with a full party to defeat a level 100 Great Lord ranked Void creature. Unfortunately, not only was this barren island home to thousands of Void worms, but they also moved in groups of 3 to 5. As for the Void Vipers that floated in the air, a single one of them could easily annihilate an entire Tier 3 team. Not even Tier 3 players would survive long on this island, much less Tier 2 players. System: you have accepted your Tier 3 promotion quest. Quest content: locate the Blade Saint legacy sealed in this void land and remove the seal to obtain the legacy. Sure enough, the promotion quest for one of the 10 Saint legacies is vicious. The corners of Shifeng's lips twitched as he read the system notification. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. He'd be at his limit fighting a single void worm. He'd have no choice but to flee if he encountered 2 at the same time, yet these void worms roamed in such large groups. Just exploring the island would be a problem, not to mention finding the Blade Saint legacy. Fortunately, he was allowed to use items in this void land, and as such he immediately pulled the Bible of Darkness from his bag and summoned a Tier 3 demon. He summoned Anna and Kite as well. He then relied on the Tier 3 demon as his mount, while Anna and Kite offered support from the sides. The void worms might be a problem for ordinary Tier 3 players, but they were merely practice targets with high HP to Anna and Kite. Their battle with the void worms was completely one-sided, and after just half an hour 5 void worms had fallen. As they died, the void worms granted Shifeng a ton of EXP and dropped a crystal that was as dark as night. A mana crystal. Shifeng could not believe his eyes as he held the crystal. How is this possible? Chapter 2306, Tier 3 Evolution Mana Crystal. To most players, this item was only a relatively rare material or decent energy source. But to Shifeng, a mana crystal was just as valuable as 7 luminaries crystals. They were so valuable to him because he could use mana crystals to evolve the Abyssal Blade. Shifeng had tasked Melancholic Smile to purchase mana crystals for that very purpose, but she had yet to find any. Learning that these void worms dropped the mana crystals had certainly come as a surprise. The Abyssal Blade was significantly helpful. In its current state, the magic weapon was as powerful as a top-tier epic weapon of the same level. Unfortunately, Shifeng couldn't afford to level up the weapon due to how many fine gold and dark gold weapons the upgrade required. The higher level a weapon was, the rarer it would be. Obtaining level 90 plus fine gold weapons was quite challenging at this stage of the game, not to mention level 90 plus dark gold weapons. Because its level had stagnated, the Abyssal Blade wasn't suitable for Shifeng at this point. However, Shifeng couldn't just abandon the weapon. Even if he stopped using it, the curse within the Abyssal Blade would still exist, and he'd periodically have to face the backlashes. Not only would the curse grow stronger as the magic weapon evolved, but it would also grow stronger as time passed, which was why players had been so afraid of magic weapons in Shifeng's previous life. Although magic weapons could be a massive asset to players, they'd also become a greater burden as players leveled up. Of course, if players could maintain the magic weapons' growth as they reached higher levels, the weapons would offer more pros than cons, and after a certain point, they'd become even stronger than epic weapons. Unfortunately, it was very difficult to maintain that growth rate during the later stages of the game. Otherwise, fewer players would have fallen to their magic weapons backlash in the past. Shifeng stored the mana crystal in his bag and continued to hunt void worms while steadily approaching the center of the island. The void land was as large as a medium-sized leveling map in the outside world, and as Shifeng grew closer to the island's core, he encountered more void worms. The monster's respawn rate increased as he traveled as well. Even with Anna and Kite's help, Shifeng prioritized caution. While the 2 personal guards could withstand the Great Lord's attacks, he couldn't. Although slaying these void worms was monotonous, the bountiful EXP and occasional mana crystal motivated Shifeng. He took barely any breaks from hunting the Great Lords. After a full day of combat, Shifeng's experience bar had reached 99% of level 100. He just needed one more kill to level up, but he decided to wait for a moment. He locked his experience bar and summoned his Thunder Eagle, allowing the flying mount to benefit from the awarded EXP instead. Flying mounts and land mounts had different mechanics. While land mounts' levels would be determined by their owner's level, flying mounts had their own experience bars. This was why nurturing a flying mount was so troublesome. This quest, fortunately, offered the perfect opportunity for Shi Feng to nurture his Thunder Eagle. Flying mounts in God's domain were an exceptional mode of transportation, but they were also capable fighters. For players to grow stronger, they had to constantly improve their levels, equipment, skills, and other aspects. Flying mounts, however, only needed to level up. It was easier for these mounts to evolve through their tiers than it was for players. Thus, it had become common practice for experts to disregard their levels temporarily to level up their flying mounts. The Thunder Eagle was an intermediate extraordinary flying mount, born with the strength of a great lord and extremely high growth potential. At level 100, its combat power might only be at the lower Tier 3 rank, but once it reached level 110, it would rise to the intermediate Tier 3 rank. At level 120, its combat power would further increase to the Tier 3 upper rank standard. Aside from frantically grinding, Shi Feng occasionally logged out to rest his mind and provide guidance for some of his guild members. Guild leader, Warblood, and Starlink are growing restless. They're not doing much right now, but I've heard that they've decided to help 13 Thrones capture a medium fortress in the Gravity Mountain range, Blackie reported. Currently, the Northern Fortress's player population is only over 900,000. If Warblood and Starlink succeed, I'm afraid it'll affect the Northern Fortress's development. Should we send people to sabotage their plan? Since the Northern Fortress was the sole medium fortress in the Gravity Mountain range, it generated astronomical sums of credits and ancient gold each day. But if the various powers captured another medium fortress, the Northern Fortress's profits would decrease. That won't be necessary. Although we have a feud with Warblood and Starlink, we have nothing against 13 Thrones, Shi Feng said, shaking his head. Moreover, capturing a medium fortress is easier said than done. Just focus on managing our own fortress. I'm still busy with my Tier 3 promotion quest and won't be back anytime soon. For now, try to buy as many plots of land near the World Tower as possible with the ancient gold we've earned. If he hadn't summoned the Tier 4 hero, Zero Wing wouldn't have been able to capture the Northern Fortress, even with the Phoenix Pavilion's help. Moreover, securing the lands around the World Tower was far more important than worrying about a fortress in another corner of the Gravity Mountain range. All right. I'll make the purchases as soon as we have the money, Blackie responded. Although he was a little disappointed that he couldn't cause some trouble for Starlink and Warblood, his anticipation began to build with the thought of the lands near the World Tower. Shi Feng had explained these plots' function, and if Zero Wing could claim every one of the lands available, Dragonheart City's various powers would live in fear of their guild. After training the guild's members, Shi Feng quickly returned to God's domain and continued to venture deeper into the barren island. With the Thunder Eagle as a part of his party, the party's overall DPS had considerably increased, and as a result Shi Feng was able to advance much faster than before. After 3 days of grinding, Shi Feng had moved into the island's inner region. The 3-day grind also allowed the Thunder Eagle to climb to level 103. Shi Feng knew that flying mounts didn't need as much EXP as players to level up, but he couldn't help his surprise at the Thunder Eagle's leveling speed. Shi Feng had also obtained 73 mana crystals from the slain void worms. His harvest here was more than enough to cover the mana stone cost of entering the void land. When he reached the inner region, he found a translucent barrier enveloping the area. The inner region looked like a completely different world compared to the outer region. The island's outer area had been a barren wasteland, while a lush forest occupied the inner region. Within this lush forest, Shi Feng spotted graves of varying sizes. The smallest were simply dirt mounds, while the larger graves looked like majestic palaces. He also spotted a large number of undead wandering through this graveyard. Forgotten Spirit. Undead Creature Lord. Level 101 HP 40, 00000/40, 000/000. These forgotten spirits weren't much of a threat. Shi Feng could easily take them out in a one-on-one fight. Unfortunately, these undead moved in groups of several dozen. Not even Shifeng was confident of surviving a battle against so many Lord-ranked monsters. Each grave was also guarded by heroic spirits of varying strengths. Heroic spirits were the remnants of departed NPC heroes. They might not be as powerful as they had been in life, but the Tier 3 heroic spirits could easily slaughter Tier 3 players, not to mention a lowly Tier 2 player like Shifeng. Even Tier 3 players have little hope of surviving in this place. Shifeng could not help but frown at the undead wandering within the magic barrier. He'd have no choice but to flee from a one-on-one battle with a level 100 Tier 3 heroic spirit. Fortunately, he had personal guards like Anna and Kite to support him. Otherwise, finding the Blade Saint legacy would be utterly impossible. The instant Shifeng stepped through the translucent barrier, however, Kite, Anna, the Tier 3 demons and his Thunder Eagle vanished. A silencing barrier. Shifeng stared at the barrier, stunned. God's domain had many types of magic barriers, and although barriers that nullified summoning-type magic arrays were rare, they could be found in certain ancient ruins. Finding such a magic barrier here was a nightmare. An ordinary level 100 Tier 2 expert wouldn't even be a match for the Lord-ranked Forgotten Spirits in a one-on-one fight. Even a Domain Realm expert would have to flee for their lives when encountering several dozen Forgotten Spirits. As for the level 100 Tier 3 heroic spirits, Domain Realm experts wouldn't even last more than 3 seconds. It's no wonder why so few people with peak legacies manage to complete their Tier 3 promotion quest. Shifeng sighed ruefully as he observed the undead around him. With how the Forgotten Spirits were positioned, Shifeng couldn't find any loopholes to exploit. Defeating these undead would be impossible with the strength of a level 100 Tier 2 player. He would need an entire 100-man team of level 100 Tier 2 experts to accomplish the feat, right? If one's not enough, I just need to face them in a group. Struck with inspiration, Shifeng stepped through the barrier and summoned Kite and Anna again. He returned to grinding void worms, planning to collect the 100 mana crystals he needed to evolve the Abyssal Blade. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU of the weapons at hand, the Abyssal Blade allowed him to execute the highest number of attacks simultaneously. With 9 Dragon Slash, he could summon 16 Abyssal Blade Phantoms, which not even the Twilight Blade could do. If he could upgrade the Abyssal Blade to Tier 3, 9 Dragon Slash would undergo a qualitative transformation, allowing him to summon even more Phantoms. It might just be enough to help him defeat so many monsters. With this plan in mind, Shifeng spent another day or so slaying void worms, eventually gathering the 100 mana crystals. The instant Shifeng picked up the 100th mana crystal, the sound of a system notification reached his ears. System, 100 mana crystals detected. Conditions to evolve the Abyssal Blade met. Do you wish to evolve the Abyssal Blade? Retrieving the long-forgotten magic weapon from his bag, Shifeng took a deep breath and declared, "Evolve." Chapter 2307, Tier 3 Abyssal Blade. The moment Shifeng tapped on the Evolve * button, the Abyssal Blade transformed into a cloud of black fog that moved toward his bag. The black fog began to devour every mana crystal in his bag like a ravenous wolf. The mana within the mana crystals was only slightly less pure than within 7 Luminaries crystals, and a single mana crystal contained enough mana to obliterate a small town from the face of the continent. When the Abyssal Blade devoured all 100 mana crystals, space around Shifeng trembled violently with the transfer of such a frightening amount of energy. At the same time, a dragon's roar echoed across the island. It felt as if space were about to explode, making room for a dragon's arrival. Is this a backlash? Shifeng's expression darkened. With every evolution, there was a chance that the magic weapon would release a backlash, and each backlash would be stronger than the last. If the weapon's owner couldn't cope with a single backlash, it would cripple their account. Initially, Shifeng had been confident of contending with a potential second backlash, but based on the mana fluctuations he sensed, he doubted that he had more than a 50% chance of surviving. Fortunately, the mana only fluctuated for a few moments. After 3 seconds, the island returned to normal, and a pitch-black sword, decorated with engraved draconic patterns, appeared some distance away. Despite standing 5 yards away from the Abyssal Blade, Shifeng could feel the magic weapon's intense dragon might weighing him down. His heels even sunk into the ground. Abyssal Blade, one-handed sword, magic weapon. Attack power plus 4055, all attributes plus 320, attack speed plus 33, ignore levels plus 25, attacks have 70% chance to cause 250% damage. 40% chance to cause 300% damage. Every attack increases damage by 2% to a maximum of 30%. If wielder belongs to a swordsman-related class, all skill levels plus 6. Increase free ability points received for every increase in level by 2 points. Equipment level 80. Can be upgraded. Devour 40 level 85 dark gold weapons to upgrade to level 85. Equipment tier 3. Can be evolved. Devour 5 god crystals to evolve to tier 4. Additional active skill 1. Phantom kill tier 3. Instantly creates a doppelganger under the wielder's control. Doppelganger has 95% of the wielder's attributes and all skills. The wielder can swap positions with the doppelganger at any time. Duration: 2 minutes cooldown. 5 minutes additional active skill 2. Abyssal bind tier 3. Binds up to 5 enemies simultaneously and prevents movement, reducing defense and magic resistance by 100%. The higher tiered the target is, the weaker the effect will be. Duration: 5 seconds cooldown. 40 seconds additional active skill 3. 9 dragons slash tier 3. Instantly creates 21 phantoms of the abyssal blade for wielder's use. Each phantom sword deals up to 80% damage. Duration: 60 seconds cooldown. 8 minutes additional active skill 4. Abyssal curse tier 3. Prevents all targets within a 100-yard radius from moving or attacking for 6 seconds and reduces their attributes by 20% for 10 minutes. Effect doubles if there is only one target in range. Cooldown: 30 minutes additional active skill 5. Dragon soul tier 3. Grants a doppelganger a dragon soul, transforming it into a black dragon. The transformed doppelganger will have the same life rating as a black dragon and can use the skill dragon breath. Duration: 5 minutes cooldown. 24 hours additional passive skill. Abyssal will. Improves wielder's physique depending on the surrounding mana density. The higher the mana density, the greater the improvement. Additional profound inheritance. Black Emperor, tier 3. When activated, every critical hit will accumulate 1 stack of death aura. Each stack can be used to increase all attributes by 4% and attack speed and movement speed by 3% for 12 seconds, or to reduce the cooldown of a skill by 5 seconds. Maximum of 27 stacks of death aura. Duration: 10 minutes cooldown. 6 hours. The famed smith Ulysses personally created the abyssal blade using the Black Dragon King's fangs as material. It is one of 36 famed swords, ranking 31st. However, the Black Dragon King himself has cursed this sword. Beyond the immense strength the blade offers, the wielder must face a backlash after a certain amount of time. However, after Jack had remodeled the abyssal blade with a star crystal, the strength of the backlash has been reduced greatly. If the wielder is unable to suppress the backlash, the wielder will receive the Black Dragon King's curse, permanently reducing all attributes by 50%. Unable to be dropped. Unable to be traded. Unable to be destroyed. So powerful. Shi Feng was stunned when he saw the evolved Abyssal Blade's attribute panel. The Abyssal Blade's attributes might not compare to the Twilight Blade and Killing Ray quite yet, but its attributes could rival that of a top-tier level 85 epic weapon, despite being only a level 80 magic weapon. However, the improved attributes weren't the most shocking aspect. The Abyssal Blade's skills had drastically improved now that it was a tier 3 weapon. Now it was the perfect weapon to use against groups. Not even an ordinary fragmented legendary weapon would be its match in this regard. Seeing the tier 3 Abyssal Blade, Shi Feng couldn't even imagine how much it would improve once it reached tier 4. Of course, evolving the magic weapon further would be immensely more difficult than it had been thus far, requiring god crystals, and 5 of them at that. One could only rely on luck to find god crystals, which were even rarer and more difficult to locate than epic weapons. Shi Feng then unequipped Killing Ray, replacing it with the Abyssal Blade. So this is the Abyssal Blade's power after another evolution? As he equipped the magic weapon, Shi Feng was astounded. His attack power and basic attributes might have decreased, but he was more compatible with the Abyssal Blade than he was with Killing Ray. The weapon felt like an extension of his body in his hand, and it was now unimaginably sharp. In its current state, the abyssal blade could easily slice through a level 100+ Great Lord scales. Moreover, the magic weapon's effects had substantially improved, and he could feel his physique growing considerably stronger. Despite replacing Killing Ray with a lower-leveled weapon, his overall combat power hadn't decreased in the slightest. Rather, it had risen. After taking a moment to familiarize himself with the upgraded abyssal blade, Shifeng shifted his attention to the graves within the inner region. The goal of his promotion quest was to locate the lost Blade Saint legacy. Obviously, it should be inside one of those graves. The countless forgotten spirits wandering through the forest and the heroic spirits guarding each grave were the only obstacles in his way. A few minutes ago, Shifeng had been helpless against the wandering forgotten spirits, but now that he had the Tier 3 abyssal blade, defeating the undead wouldn't be a problem. Now he only had to figure out a way to distract the heroic spirits while he opened the graves. Unfortunately, since he didn't know which grave contained the legacy, he decided to challenge heroic spirit guarding the nearest and smallest grave. The instant Shifeng crossed through the translucent barrier, the undead roaming near the chosen grave sensed Shifeng's aura and charged toward him. Although the forgotten spirits didn't have very high intellect, even a peak expert would have to flee if several dozen attacked together. Go! Shifeng immediately activated 9 Dragons Slash. Like a group of experts, the 21 abyssal blade phantoms flew forth to open a path for Shifeng. Although each phantom only possessed 90% of Shifeng's strength, the attribute was just as high as an actual level 100 Tier 3 players. As a result, the abyssal blade phantoms effortlessly suppressed the approaching forgotten spirits. With one exchange, the phantoms shoved aside the several dozen undead, allowing Shifeng to reach the small grave. This is a resting place for the dead. The living have no place here. The spear-wielding Tier 3 heroic spirit guarding the grave bellowed as he thrust his spear at Shifeng. Forgotten heroic spirit. Undead Tier 3 Berserker King. Level 10 HP 54,000/54,000,000. Although the heroic spirit did not have a lot of HP, he employed an advanced combat technique with that simple thrust, causing his opponent to ignore the weapon unconsciously. Moreover, the attack contained peak Tier 3 power, easily enough to repulse level 100+ Grand Lords. If this attack struck a Tier 3 player, they'd die instantly. Witnessing the heroic spirit's strength, Shifeng lost any confidence in defeating the undead. Fortunately, he didn't actually plan to fight the heroic spirit. Shifeng responded to the attack by using Phantom Kill, sending his doppelganger forward while activating Defensive Blade to block the strike. Shifeng then rushed toward the grave. The moment Shifeng touched the grave, a prompt window appeared before him. System: do you wish to activate the grave and absorb a portion of the grave owner's legacy? Ecstatic, Shifeng activated the grave. However, a loading bar appeared the moment he did. Activating the grave would require a total of 8 seconds. When the heroic spirit sensed the grave's activation, he flew into a rage. Ignoring Shifeng's doppelganger, the heroic spirit dashed toward the offending player. Sure enough, this won't be that easy. As the heroic spirit ran toward him, Shifeng stopped holding back. He had his doppelganger activate its legacy berserk skill, Blade Liberation, focusing all of his attention on controlling the doppelganger as it attacked the heroic spirit. Lightning Flash. A web of sword lights enveloped the heroic spirit, yet the undead didn't seem concerned in the least. He spun and met the attack with his spear. The sounds of clanging metal echoed throughout the forest. Not only had the heroic spirit blocked every sword light the doppelganger had sent at him, but he managed to do so without stumbling a single step backward. The doppelganger wasn't a match for the heroic spirit, but Shifeng didn't care. His only goal was to delay the Tier 3 heroic spirit for 8 seconds, not defeat him. Shifeng finally absorbed a portion of the grave owner's legacy as he sacrificed his doppelganger. As he did, a legacy completion rate section had appeared in his quest window. System: legacy completion rate 15%. Do you wish to accept this legacy? So that's how this works. Shifeng immediately understood how he was supposed to complete his promotion quest. Every grave in this lush forest contained the Blade Saint legacy, but each grave contained a different completion rate of the legacy which couldn't be combined. It was up to him to decide how much of the legacy he wanted to leave with. following which Shifeng abandoned the completion rate he had acquired from the small grave and escaped through the barrier. The moment he crossed the magic barrier, the forgotten spirits and heroic spirit chasing him gave up and returned to their original positions. Now that he understood his quest's mechanics, Shifeng set his sights on the higher quality graves in the island's inner region. Naturally, the more magnificent graves were guarded by stronger heroic spirits. The largest grave sat within the forest's core, as opulent as a palace with a level 100 Tier 4 heroic spirit standing guard. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The graves that were a grade inferior to the palace-like grave in the center were protected by heroic spirits with titles. Heroic spirits that earned a title after their deaths had been heroes among heroes during their lives. Killing apex experts of the same tier would have been child's play. Although they had lost a significant portion of the strength after death, they could still kill apex experts with little to no effort. I can only give it a try. Shifeng gritted his teeth as he set his sights on a greatsword-wielding, titled heroic spirit. He knew he had no hope of activating the grandest grave in the cemetery. The gap between Tier 3 and Tier 4 existences was massive, let alone the gap between Tier 2 and Tier 4. The moment the Tier 4 heroic spirit noticed him, he'd die. However, he wasn't willing to settle for third-grade graves. After all, the legacy's completion rate would severely affect the Tier 3 promotion quest's rewards. At the very least, he had to try for the second-grade graves. Once his skills cooldowns had finished, Shifeng dashed into the inner region once more, running straight for a grave that was the size of a small high-rise. Chapter 2308. Abyssal Blades Might. Shifeng's target was near the center of the forest. Simply approaching it would be incredibly difficult due to the groups of forgotten spirits that moved closer together near the forest's core. If Shifeng relied on his own strength to reach the grave, he wouldn't get close to it, much less activate it. Several hundred forgotten spirits flew toward him, and Shifeng felt his scalp go numb. Fortunately, he was barely able to keep the forgotten spirits out of attack range with the 21 abyssal blades fighting for him. 9 dragons had a time limit, however, so he couldn't stop the undead like this forever. Although Shifeng was confident that he could escape these monsters with his life, if he couldn't keep the forgotten spirits at bay, that would be it. He wouldn't be able to do anything more. If he wished to secure the second-grade legacy, it was crucial that he utilized 9 dragons' duration efficiently. It took me 42 seconds to reach this grave, which is about as long as I estimated. Glancing at 9 dragons' remaining duration, Shifeng breathed a sigh of relief. I should be able to activate the grave within the remaining time. There were 2 reasons that Shifeng had passed up the highest grade grave. Naturally, the first was the Tier 4 heroic spirit that guarded it. His second reason was the lack of time. Reaching and activating the second-grade graves within 9 dragons' 60-second duration was his limit. Before Shifeng could catch his breath, the silver-armored, greatsword-wielding heroic spirit that guarded the gravestone abruptly opened his eyes. A faint, red barrier then enveloped the gravesite, decreasing Shifeng's basic attributes and physique by 20%. Erdia, Flame Knight. Heroic Spirit Tier 3 Berserker King. Level 101 HP 78. 000 000/78 000 A domain. Shifeng's expression darkened as he stared at Erdia. Shifeng had assumed that Erdia had the strength to instant kill Tier 3 players, but he had never thought that the heroic spirit would be this powerful. Erdia might not have a lot more HP than the heroic spirit he had fought earlier, but he was definitely much stronger. Purely regarding basic attributes, he had to be 30% stronger than the forgotten heroic spirit. In combination with its domain, which only Tier 4 NPCs and above could grasp, Erdia could squash Tier 3 players like ants. I commend your bravery, adventurer. Over the several millennia I have stood guard, you're the first to dare approach in search of the Blade Saint's legacy. I hope you can offer some entertainment, Erdia leisurely commented. Unlike the forgotten heroic spirit, which had attacked immediately, he joked around like a player as he slowly approached Shifeng. Seeing this, a chill crawled down Shifeng's spine. They might be dead heroes, but heroic spirits weren't considered NPCs in God's domain. Because of this, their intellect shouldn't be as high as NPCs. However, that was obviously not the case for Erdia. This was also the first time Shifeng had encountered such an intelligent heroic spirit. Seeing that Erdia was already 50 yards away, Shifeng activated the Ring of Gospel's miniature world and Ring of Brilliance as a precaution. Unfortunately, Shifeng could tell that wouldn't be enough after the two skills had taken effect. He then activated Blade Liberation to bolster his basic attributes further, and at the same time he activated the Twilight Blades Twilight of the Gods and Twilight's Shadow, splitting into 8 clones. With Twilight of the Gods and Blade Liberation active, Shifeng's physical doppelgangers inherited the skill's effects. Now every one of his doppelgangers had the strength to rival Grand Lords of the same level. If 8 level 100 Grand Lords worked together, they could even take on a level 100 mythic monster. However, before Shifeng could control his doppelgangers, Erdia vanished, reappearing before Shifeng's clones. The heroic spirit brandished his flaming great sword, sending 8 crimson sword lights at all 8 doppelgangers. Shifeng's doppelgangers reacted quickly, intercepting the attacks with their swords. However, the moment the crimson sword lights met the doppelgangers' blades, the impact threw them over a dozen yards before they slammed into the ground, their swords humming. Each doppelganger instantly lost over 20,000 HP. A bronze combat technique? Shifeng's expression turned grim when he saw the outcome. Extreme Slash. Although Erdia had only executed 8 extreme slashes, one fewer than Miracle Dragon's 9 extreme slashes, Erdia's mastery with the technique was far greater than Miracle Dragon's. He had mastered the advanced combat technique until he had upgraded it into a bronze combat technique. This was a tier 3 heroic spirit that could use bronze combat techniques. No one would have believed Shifeng if he had told them about Erdia's abilities in his previous life. Some might even mock him for his stupidity. Heroic spirits might have once been heroes, but they weren't anymore. They particularly lacked intellect and weren't even a match for ordinary NPCs regarding this aspect. Seeing a heroic spirit execute an advanced combat technique was already quite impressive. Most Tier 3 NPCs couldn't even master a bronze combat technique, much less a Tier 3 heroic spirit. And yet, the impossible had just happened. After repelling the 8 doppelgangers, Erdia shifted his gaze to Shifeng's main body. He executed Flame Charge, transforming into a fiery meteor as he flew toward the swordsman. Based on how this flame charge appeared, Erdia's skill completion rate should be 99% or 100%. Shifeng didn't dare take Erdia's charge head-on. If the heroic spirit had already thrown his doppelgangers, he could definitely send Shifeng flying. Shifeng activated Phantom Kill, summoning another doppelganger and having it activate Blade Liberation and Defensive Blade to intercept the approaching Berserker King. If he died during his Tier 3 promotion quest, he'd have to wait a long time before he could challenge it again. It was a risk he wasn't willing to take. However, the moment Shifeng's doppelganger activated Defensive Blade, Erdia cancelled his flame charge and thrust his flaming greatsword into the ground. Dozens of fiery blades rose from the dirt, flying toward the doppelganger. Tier 3 skill Storm Garrote. Defensive Blade's block counts were exhausted in an instant. Seeing this, Shifeng had no choice but to focus most of his attention on his doppelganger and executed Sword's Orbit. When the galaxy of stars and the flaming blades met, both attacks shattered. Although the doppelganger had successfully blocked the attacks, it had been forced to stumble over a dozen steps backward. Moreover, each attack had devoured nearly 10,000 of the doppelganger's HP. With just one skill, Erdia had dealt over -200,000 damage. As they kept the forgotten spirits away from the grave site, the Abyssal Blade Phantom's duration continued to decrease, and Shifeng's doppelganger couldn't keep Erdia distracted. It began to make Shifeng even more nervous. If he activated twofold Berserk, he could hold Erdia off, but he needed to activate the grave with his main body. There was no point in trying to distract the heroic spirit himself. He intended to reserve absolute domain for his escape from this place. Even if he activated the grave and obtained the legacy contained within, he would fail his quest without it. Your doppelgangers are quite good, but this is as far as you'll get, Erdia declared, chuckling when he realized Shifeng's doppelganger had survived his Storm Garrote. Erdia pulled his great sword from the ground and appeared before the doppelganger. He executed 8 extreme slashes once more, but this time he concentrated all 8 attacks on a single target. Dragon Soul. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Shifeng understood that if his doppelganger died, this quest would come to an end. Hence, he decided to use the Abyssal Blade's strongest skill, Dragon Soul. Right now, every attribute point mattered. Shifeng's doppelganger roared, the sound filling the entire forest. As it did, the doppelganger transformed into a 10-meter-tall, pitch-black dragon. It had more than doubled in size than when the Abyssal Blade had only been a Tier 2 weapon. Seeing the 8 sword lights fly toward it, Shifeng's doppelganger swiped a single claw to block them all. Boom! The sword lights slammed into the doppelganger's claw, and an intense shockwave shook the forest, only fading after extending 100 yards away. A spatial tear had even appeared before the dragon's claw, and the doppelganger only stumbled a step back. Chapter 2309, Blade Saint Legacy secured so strong. Shifeng was surprised to see his doppelganger only lose a little over 5,000 HP after receiving Erdia's 8 extreme slashes. Although his doppelganger had already been quite powerful with Dragon Soul active, nearly invincible among beings of the same tier, it had grown even stronger, especially its strength and defense. In these two attributes, his doppelganger could practically rival Tier 4 mythic monsters. Moreover, the size of the black dragon's body afforded Shifeng plenty of advantages. Before the black dragon's 10-meter-tall frame, Erdia looked like little more than a small animal. The doppelganger wouldn't have any issue stopping the heroic spirit's attacks. However, Erdia didn't pause after his attack failed. He immediately appeared before the black dragon's head, his flaming greatsword transforming into a colossal pillar of fire. Tier 3 taboo skill, Burning Sword. When the fire pillar completed its transformation, it stretched across 100 yards. The black dragon looked tiny before the flaming weapon, and Erdia swung it down on the doppelganger. Not even Shifeng could escape the pillar's range, much less the black dragon. Don't think I'm so easy to kill. As the fire pillar descended, Shifeng had his black dragon use Dragon Breath. Unlike the Dragon Breath skill from his Heavenly Dragon's Breath Ring, the black dragon's ability was the real deal. According to legend, a Tier 5 Dragon Breath could vaporize an entire city instantly. The true Dragon Breath was easily more powerful than any taboo skill or curse, essentially rivaling divine arts. The black dragon opened its maw, and a horrific amount of mana concentrated between its jaws. In the blink of an eye, a pitch-black energy ball as large as a small house had taken shape, and as the black dragon released a deafening roar, the energy ball reformed as a pillar of pitch-black light, firing toward the heroic spirit's pillar of fire. Boom! The Dragon Breath and Burning Sword slammed into each other, creating a shockwave that shook their surroundings and didn't dissipate until it had spread 500 yards away. At the point of impact, space had crumbled, forming a black hole. It felt as if Armageddon had begun. Sure enough, the true Dragon Breath is far more powerful. Shifeng could not help but be astonished when he saw Erdia being sent flying. Shifeng had only hoped that the black dragon would stop Erdia's killing move. He hadn't actually expected the doppelganger to win that exchange, dealing over -30,000 damage to the heroic spirit. Erdia wasn't in danger of dying after losing 30,000 HP, but it was enough damage for the black dragon to hold the heroic spirit's aggro. Now, Erdia's focus had turned away from Shifeng's main body. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Shifeng charged at the gravestone. System. Do you wish to activate the grave and absorb a portion of the grave owner's legacy? Without any hesitation, Shifeng activated the grave the moment the prompt window appeared. Like the previous grave, a loading bar appeared when he activated. However, this loading bar required 12 seconds, rather than the 8 seconds the previous grave had required. Shifeng celebrated the fact that he had decided to keep absolute defense in reserve. Had he used the skill to stop Erdia, rather than rely on Dragon Soul, he would have died halfway through the activation process. Unfortunately, the instant Shifeng activated the grave, Erdia went berserk. Ignoring the black dragon, the heroic spirit dashed toward Shifeng. Only a little over 100 yards separated Erdia and Shifeng, and a titled Tier 3 heroic spirit would only need a few steps to cross that distance. However, the black dragon intercepted Erdia near the halfway mark, using its massive frame to keep the heroic spirit away from Shifeng. The black dragon then swiped a claw at its foe. The black dragon's claw was the size of a car, and although Erdia sensed the incoming attack, he couldn't dodge it in time, relying on his greatsword to block it. As the claw slid along the massive blade, dazzling sparks flew from the weapon. Erdia knocked away the black dragon's claw with his great sword. Now he fully displayed the strength of a Tier 3 heroic spirit. Even a Tier 2 dragon would find him a difficult opponent. Fortunately, there wasn't a particularly large difference between the two combatants' basic attributes. Although the heroic spirit had knocked away the black dragon's claw, the dragon steadily remained in its original position. It had only taken a little over -2,000 damage from the clash. The black dragon had tens of millions of HP, so this amount of damage was nothing. Realizing this, Erdia stopped relying on brute force to break past the black dragon. Instead, he executed a combat technique, transforming into 7 phantoms that charged at Shifeng's main body. Advanced combat technique Flowing Shadow. The 7 phantoms looked and felt exactly the same. Not even Shifeng could tell the difference. But he wasn't ready to give up just yet. In response, he executed Lightning Slash through his black dragon. As a bronze combat technique, Shifeng even had trouble executing Lightning Flash with his main body, not to mention with a doppelganger, but the black dragon's physique was far superior to his, so Shifeng barely managed to pull it off. 14 claw strikes then plowed into the 7 phantoms. Metallic clangs echoed through the cemetery as Erdia blocked all 14 strikes. The black dragon lost over 30,000 HP and stumbled a step back, but it had achieved its goal and stopped Erdia's advance. Only Shifeng had paled from the effort of executing Lightning Flash with the black dragon. It consumed so much concentration. Shifeng could feel a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He had expended significantly more concentration when executing the bronze combat technique through the black dragon than when he used the technique himself. Of course, Erdia hadn't given up. He executed Flowing Shadow again, trying to reach Shifeng. With no other options, Shifeng continued to rely on Lightning Flash to stop Erdia. 2 times, 3 times, 5. Every time Shifeng executed Lightning Flash, a considerable portion of his concentration slipped away. By the time he executed the technique for the 6th time, he felt mentally lethargic. However, he still needed 5 more seconds to complete the activation process. By the time Shifeng executed Lightning Flash a 9th time, his complexion was as white as paper. He felt a stinging pain in his head and the world seemed to spin around him. Now he couldn't even control the abyssal blade phantoms to stop the swarming undead. A large number of forgotten spirits flew toward Shifeng, and Erdia circled the black dragon, appearing before Shifeng's main body. The heroic spirit swung his flaming greatsword down on the swordsman. 8 extreme slashes. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. 8 massive sword lights appeared and threatened to devour Shifeng completely. When the 8 sword lights were only an inch away from him, Shifeng gritted his teeth and activated Absolute Domain. Golden, divine runes immediately began to appear on his body. As the 8 sword lights crossed that final inch, they came to an abrupt halt against the divine runes, unable to touch Shifeng. With Absolute Domain's protection, neither Erdia nor the Forgotten Spirits could harm Shifeng. Needless to say, they couldn't stop Shifeng from activating the grave either. System. Legacy completion rate 85%. Do you wish to accept this legacy? Chapter 23:10. Erdia vs. Anna. As soon as he saw the system notification, Shifeng accepted the legacy. He didn't know how good a legacy with an 85% completion rate would be, but it was undoubtedly better than the 15% legacy he had found earlier. After Shifeng accepted the legacy, countless divine runes began to flow from the grave toward him, forming a glowing imprint on the back of his hand. Suddenly, Shifeng bore the mark of a purple-gold sword. The moment the mark formed, Erdia descended into madness. His muscles bulged and a cloak of fire enveloped his frame. The temperature around him soared, and the flaming cloak burned the earth under his feet to black ash. If Shifeng hadn't activated Absolute Domain, he'd likely lose astonishing amounts of HP due to his proximity to the heroic spirit. With Erdia going into full berserk mode and his Absolute Domain's duration almost up, Shifeng switched the 7 luminaries' rings aura of earth to the aura of wind and activated Gale Domain to make a hasty retreat. While all forms of teleportation were prohibited in the Voidland's inner area, flying fortunately was not. Gale Domain was Shifeng's only hope of escaping from the inner area. Without it, he wouldn't have any chance of leaving the inner region even if he had the legacy. He no longer had 9 dragons to rely on, and he had a titled Tier 3 heroic spirit after him. However, before Shifeng could leave the grave, Erdia charged forth like a meteor. The heroic spirit was so fast that not even the black dragon could stop him in time. Boom! Erdia crashed into Shifeng, and the golden divine runes that protected him actually trembled. This hadn't even happened when Erdia had hacked and slashed at Shifeng earlier. The heroic spirit proceeded to brandish his flaming greatsword at Shifeng over and over. For a moment, even Shifeng was helpless against the countless sword lights. He couldn't keep up with the speed of any of these attacks. Erdia's attack speed wasn't that much faster than his, but he couldn't keep up with the heroic spirit's reaction speed. With Erdia's basic attributes, the heroic spirit could finish Shifeng off in 2 or 3 hits, even if Shifeng activated twofold berserk. Absolute Domain only had 6 seconds remaining, and Shifeng was still nearly 1,500 yards away from the inner region's barrier. Throwing caution to the wind, he flew straight for the barrier. Despite the fact that Erdia couldn't fly, the undead had no issues keeping up with Shifeng, continuously attacking the fleeing swordsman. Every one of Erdia's attacks had enough power to injure mythic monsters. Shifeng would have already died several times if it hadn't been for Absolute Domain's protection. 5 seconds. 3 seconds. 1 second. Unfortunately, Shifeng's flying speed was fast, but he couldn't reach the barrier within 6 seconds. He was still roughly 500 yards from his target when Absolute Domain's effects wore off. As soon as they did, Shifeng felt a scorching heat envelop his body, dealing minus 10,000 damage per second. Seeing the divine runes fade from Shifeng's body, Erdia sneered at his prey. He pushed off the ground and arrived before Shifeng in an instant, plunging his flaming greatsword down on Shifeng's head. 8 extreme slashes. This time, every one of the 8 sword lights contained Tier 4 power. Not even the black dragon would be strong enough to block the attack, much less Shifeng. Fortunately, Shifeng had prepared for this moment and activated Defensive Blade. Another series of metallic clangs echoed throughout the forest. Erdia had exhausted over half of Defensive Blade's block counts in that one exchange. By the time Defensive Blade ended, Shifeng had only moved 50 yards closer to the barrier. As Erdia was about to launch another attack, Shifeng activated Abyssal Bind. Over 20 pitch-black chains emerged from the void, binding Erdia and forcing the heroic spirit to a grinding halt. At Tier 3, Abyssal Bind could hold a target for up to 5 seconds, and it should be 100% effective against a Tier 3 being like Erdia. It was also Shifeng's final trump card. However, before Shifeng could relax, he heard the sound of a chain shattering. When he had gone berserk, Erdia had become nearly stronger than a mythic monster. It had only taken the heroic spirit an instant to shatter one of the chains. As if they were made of paper, the other chains began to break, one after another. For the crime of desecrating a saint's grave, you will die. Erdia bellowed as he swung his freed arms, slashing his greatsword at Shifeng, who stood over 50 yards away. As Erdia swung his greatsword, a torrent of fire swept toward Shifeng. Shifeng spun, meeting the attack with his swords as the flames were about to hit him. Void Shield. Boom. The Void Shield, which had 10 times Shifeng's maximum HP, nearly shattered as a result of the attack, and the impact threw Shifeng backward over 30 yards. What a frightening move. Shifeng silently celebrated when he saw that his Void Shield had only cracked. If he hadn't responded appropriately, that attack would have killed him. Erdia was far more powerful than Shifeng had imagined. Had he allowed his strength and greed to blind him, challenging the largest grave instead, he would have died the moment his Absolute Domain's duration ended. Meanwhile, thanks to Erdia's attack, Shifeng and the heroic spirit were now separated by 100 yards. Although Abyssal Bind wouldn't hold down Erdia for 5 seconds, it should be able to keep him in place for 2. Fortunately, as a Tier 3 heroic spirit, Erdia couldn't attack a target that was so far away. In the remaining 2 seconds, Shifeng widened the gap between him and his pursuer by more than 300 yards. Erdia's movement speed was much higher than Shifeng's, but during a chance, Erdia would need some time to get within attack range. Meanwhile, Shifeng continued to move closer to the barrier. 150 yards. 100 yards. 50 yards. When Erdia was less than 80 yards away from Shifeng and was about to bombard the fleeing swordsman once more, Shifeng finally slipped through the magic barrier. Enraged, Erdia sent another wave of fire at Shifeng, but this time, Shifeng retrieved a summon guard scroll and called forth Anna. As Anna appeared before him, Shifeng breathed a sigh of relief. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. He might not be a match for a titled Tier 3 heroic spirit, but that wasn't the case for Anna. Anna was an epic guard with a 113-point growth potential. She might not rival an NPC hero of the same tier, but she wasn't far from it. She'd have no problems holding off Erdia. Calmly, Anna swung her staff and cast a spell in response to Erdia's fiery attack. A black-white two-fold magic array appeared before the personal guard. The moment Erdia's flames encountered the array, it looked like they had crashed into the side of a rocky mountain. No matter how much fire crashed into and burned the magic array, they didn't do any damage. All right, let's leave. With Erdia chasing after him, even after he had crossed the inner region's magic barrier, Shifeng immediately activated the Tier 2 group instantaneous teleportation scroll he had pulled from his bag earlier, leaving the island with Anna by his side. Chapter 23:11 Mana Body Star Moon Kingdom, White River City. Once Shifeng and Anna had arrived in the Voidlands safe zone, he used a return scroll and teleported back to White River City. However, he nearly thought he had arrived at the wrong place when he emerged from the teleportation array. Many of the players in the teleportation hall had already reached level 90, and there were quite a few level 91 players among the crowd. Not even Dragonheart Island's experts should have reached this level yet. He had only been busy with his Tier 3 promotion quest for a few days. The effects of the planar passages opening early are so drastic. The open planar passages was the only explanation Shifeng could think of. The planar passages activation wouldn't just lead to new players on the main continent. It would also bring in an abundance of resources, including leveling resources. During Shifeng's previous life, the planar passages activation had triggered a leveling frenzy among the main continent's players, but it had been nothing compared to this. However, after giving the matter some more thought, Shifeng knew such a situation wasn't impossible. His presence in God's domain had already caused a significant butterfly effect, and players in this life leveled much faster than in the past. With the planar passages activating before mainstream players had even reached level 100, the increased resources would have a greater effect on players. With so many excellent grinding spots available, it was only natural that players would level up faster than before. As Shifeng was about to leave the teleportation hall, a 100-man team of independent players walked into the building. Noticing the team's arrival, many players in the hall turned their attention to the newcomers, chatting quietly amongst themselves. Quick look, here's Silver Arrow. They must be heading out to raid another level 95 team dungeon. I wonder when our adventurer team will be ready to do the same. Your adventurer team? Dream on. Even the Black Dragon Empire's players are just starting to raid level 95 team dungeons, not to mention Star Moon Kingdom's players. Moreover, Silver Arrow was one of the first adventurer teams to join the Shadowless Adventurer Alliance, and it's received a lot of help from the Shadow Empire Adventurer Team, L. I guess you're right, but joining the Shadowless Adventurer Alliance is so difficult. I've heard that many of the well-known adventurer teams from the neighboring kingdoms have been rejected. That's right. The passing rate is incredibly low, but as long as an adventurer team becomes a member, it'll undergo a metamorphosis. Not only will its overall strength significantly increase, but not even first-rate guilds and superpowers experts would dare to mess with it. The various players discussing the Silver Arrow adventurer team did so in envy. Most of Silver Arrow's members had already reached level 92, which not even superpowers main force members had reached. The surrounding players were even more jealous when they saw the equipment Silver Arrow's members wore. Every member of the adventurer team had a full set of level 90 fine gold equipment. Although many expert players had climbed to level 90 or above due to the planar passages, very few had acquired level 90 weapons and equipment, much less top-tier items. With a full set of level 90 fine gold equipment, players would qualify to raid level 95 team dungeons. The Otherworld's adventurer alliances have already developed this far? Shifeng had to admit that he was a little surprised to see Silver Arrow's members. The Otherworld's adventurer teams had only begun to form adventurer alliances after the main continent's various powers had tried to invade these otherworlds multiple times in the past. The adventurer alliances had then relied on independent players to contest for the level 100+ neutral maps on the main continent, at which point many of the main continent's powers had begun to perish. Shi Feng had never thought the butterfly effect would be so massive that Otherworld's powers would form adventurer alliances by this stage of the game. With this, these Otherworld powers would pose a much greater threat to the main continent's powers than they had during his previous life. After the commotion Silver Arrow's team had caused, Shi Feng rushed out of the teleportation hall and made his way to the library. He had thought that he was far ahead of most players since he had reached level 100 and completed his Tier 3 promotion quest. He also had Kola and the others who had already reached level 95 and beyond. They should reach level 100 soon. However, it seemed that the butterfly effect he had caused would be disastrous for him. If he couldn't quickly become a lord of a neutral map as the various superpowers in the past had, both he and Zero Wing would vanish into history. Half an hour later, Shi Feng arrived at the top floor of White River City's library. He found Charlene quietly reading an ancient tome from her throne at the far end of the Star Moon Hall. "You really know how to surprise people. I thought you'd be stuck there for several months," Charlene said, smiling as she pulled her gaze from the book and looked at Shi Feng. "Are you really prepared to inherit your legacy? You only have one opportunity. Your performance will greatly affect your future." "I'm ready." Shi Feng nodded. The Tier 3 promotion quest consisted of 2 parts. Locating the lost legacy was the first part and inheriting it was the second. The second part was also the most important of the promotion quest, in which one would change their body's mana framework. As a major turning point in God's domain, players' physiques and their body's mana framework would transform when they reached Tier 3. Of course, not all mana frameworks were equal. The difference in their strengths would even exist among players with ordinary Tier 3 classes. Players inherited a variety of legacies, and those with different mana frameworks would display varying levels of strength. However, these differences wouldn't display in a player's physique, but would affect the world's rules. For example, Tier 2 players could only survive for a short time in level 100+ neutral maps due to the area's environments, even if they just stood there and did nothing. In comparison, Tier 3 players could survive for a long time in a level 100+ neutral map due to their body's mana framework. The stronger a player's mana framework was, the greater their survivability would be in poor environments. Their mana framework would also largely impact their stamina and concentration recovery rates. This was why Tier 3 classes had such a huge impact in God's domain. Although Shi Feng had already obtained his legacy, he wasn't out of the woods yet. His ability to inherit the legacy was far more important. Shi Feng had only completed a Tier 3 bronze legacy in the past, and although the bronze legacy had been among the best of its peers, and he had formed a nearly perfect mana body, it hadn't been enough to get him through his Tier 4 promotion quest. Normally, only players with a silver-ranked mana body could survive in the harsh environments that served as the venue for Tier 4 promotion quests. As a result, he had always been a step away from clearing the quest in his previous life. Of course, if he had had a piece of legendary equipment back then, the results would have been different. Even a piece of fragmented legendary equipment would have changed the outcome significantly. Unfortunately, he never managed to find one, so he hadn't been able to cross that threshold. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Alright, this is your decision, but you must remember that your time is limited. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Charlene warned. Seeing how determined Shi Feng was to see the rest of his promotion quest through, she began to chant the incantation. The sword mark on the back of Shi Feng's right hand began to burn, and at the same time, countless divine runes appeared across his body, gradually forming a gigantic fourfold magic array. 3 windows displaying mana body samples then appeared before him, each more complex than the last. Shi Feng was ecstatic the moment he saw the magic array and sample mana bodies. The number of layers the magic array had, which would construct the mana body, represented the rank of the mana body that could be created. A single-layered magic array represented bronze rank, a 2-layered magic array represented silver rank, and so on. The mana body samples represented the complete mana body's standard. The first sample represented the basic standard, the second represented the intermediate standard, and the third represented the advanced standard. However, the magic array that enveloped Shifeng now had 4 layers. He had never heard of a 4-fold magic array creating a mana body before. Chapter 23:12 Advanced Epic. Once Charlene had formed the magic array, a series of system notification rang in Shifeng's ears. System: congratulations on completing your Tier 3 promotion quest and obtaining the Blade Saint Legacy. Legacy completion rate 85%. Advanced Epic Legacy received. You have 4 hours to construct your mana body. System: congratulations on being the first player to complete the Tier 3 promotion quest. You will have 1 additional hour to construct your mana body. Epic rank. Shifeng was stunned when he read the system notifications. The highest rank mana body he had heard of during his previous life had only been gold rank, and only 1 out of every 10,000 experts had earned a gold-ranked mana body during their Tier 3 promotion quests. These experts had been powerhouses in level 100+ neutral maps, strong enough to give the various superpowers massive headaches. A gold mana body provided more than high adaptability to harsh environments. It also elevated players' stamina and concentration recovery rates to extraordinary highs. Players' stamina and concentration would recover by absorbing the mana around them. Depending on the density of the mana in the area, their recovery rates would increase by 30% to 60%. With such a significant improvement to their stamina and concentration recovery rates, players would no longer have to rely on stamina equipment, replacing such items with equipment that provided more raw power. This was why players with gold mana bodies were so much stronger than ordinary experts and could freely roam in level 100+ neutral maps. Even superpowers would find these players quite challenging to hunt down. This was also why the various superpowers' influence on independent players would significantly decrease when they reached Tier 3, even to the extent that top adventurer teams could begin to contend with superpowers. The Midnight Tea Party was a prime example of this. After level 100, players had had an absurdly difficult time trying to join the Midnight Tea Party during Shifeng's previous life. Once the adventurer team's members had reached Tier 3, a gold-ranked mana body had become a requirement for joining the team. Even superpowers had been helpless against an entire group of experts with gold mana bodies in level 100+ neutral maps. And Shifeng hadn't even heard of an epic mana body. Moreover, he now had a total of 5 hours to construct his mana body. In the past he had only had 1 hour to construct his bronze mana body, and players with gold mana bodies had only been given 2 hours. The process of constructing a mana body was mostly the same across the board. The outcome depended on how much one could complete in the allotted time, and one's progress depended on how much time they invested in the trials. You can begin your mana body's construction now. Remember, you only have 5 hours. If you fail to complete a mana body before time runs out, the magic array will grant you the most basic mana body available, and your efforts will have gone to waste, Charlene reminded Shifeng seriously. Understood. He nodded, understanding how important this matter was. Immediately, Shifeng carefully inspected the 3 mana body samples hovering before him. Each of the mana bodies displayed was different and more complicated than the last. The simplest of the 3 was several times more complex than the Peak Bronze Legacy's mana body he had obtained in the past. Not only did these samples involve magic arrays, but they also required divine runes and refined mana manipulation. Any ordinary player might be able to copy the mana body samples blindly, but their completion rate wouldn't be high. Naturally, a low completion rate would severely affect one's combat power. A player's mana body would affect their control with their skills and spells in the future. A poorly constructed mana body would result in low mana conductibility. This would limit players' ability to use Tier 3 skills and spells with a completion rate of 90% or higher, since players had to actively guide and control their mana during the process to amplify their skills or spells' power. This was also why experts in Shifeng's previous life had preferred to aim for less complex mana bodies to ensure high completion rates, rather than aim for a more complex mana body with a low completion rate. If players constructed a perfect mana body, it wouldn't negatively affect their combat power, which would be a significant help when challenging their Tier 4 promotion quests in the future. Shifeng spent around 10 minutes inspecting the 3 mana body samples he had been given. Although the advanced mana body is extremely complex and even involves multi-line mana manipulation, I have 5 hours to play around with. I should give it a try. Having made his decision, Shifeng focused on the advanced mana body sample and began to manipulate the mana within him. There might not be a huge difference between an intermediate mana body's environmental adaptability and that of an advanced mana body, but the difference between the two options' recovery rates and defense was massive. Naturally, players' defense would undergo a considerable transformation when they reached Tier 3 and obtained their mana body. Their toughness as a Tier 2 player couldn't even compare. With a mana body, a layer of protective mana would envelop their frame, making them less prone to physical injury, which would reduce their combat power from ordinary attacks. Naturally, the higher the mana body's rank was, the stronger this protective layer would be. It would also help players recover from physical injuries much faster. Time flew by. After nearly 20 minutes, Shifeng had finally finished constructing his first mana body. Shifeng could feel himself grow much stronger the instant he completed his mana body. Now the surrounding mana actively flowed into him, giving him a mentally refreshed feeling. System: mana body constructed. Completion rate 64%. Do you wish to keep this mana body? I barely passed? Sure enough, the advanced mana body isn't easy to construct. Shifeng gave the completion rate a bitter smile. But to think that this mana body is so powerful despite a 64% completion rate, an epic mana body is really amazing. Normally, a mana body with a 60% completion rate was only considered passable. If one failed to achieve a passing completion rate in the designated time, they'd be stuck with the default mana body. With the default option, achieving a 90% completion rate with Tier 3 skills and spells would be practically impossible. Players typically needed a 75% completion rate mana body to ensure their skills and spells would remain unaffected. In the past, Shifeng had constructed his bronze mana body with a 95% completion rate. At that standard, a direct hit from a mysterious iron weapon had, at most, left a small scratch, hardly affecting his combat power. However, he didn't have much hope of achieving a 95% completion rate with his mana body in this life. An epic mana body was simply too complex. His only goal was to get an 80% completion rate to avoid any negative effects to his combat power. Even with an 80% completion rate with an epic mana body, only secret silver weapons and better would be capable of physically injuring him. Shifeng then started his second attempt. After the first attempt, he chose not to focus on speed. Rather, he took great care slowly constructing the mana body. After more than half an hour, Shifeng had ended up with a 72% completion rate, just short of the 75% threshold. Shifeng invested a full hour for his third attempt, but he had only earned a 74% completion rate. What am I missing? He began to grow frustrated as he examined the advanced mana body sample again. He had already spent nearly half of his allotted time, yet he hadn't constructed an adequate advanced mana body. If he continued to waste time, he wouldn't even have enough time to attempt the intermediate mana body's construction. He had performed every step with great precision, yet he still only achieved a 74% completion rate. During his previous life, he hadn't been anywhere near the refinement realm standard, yet he had still managed a 95% completion rate with his mana body. However, even as a domain realm expert, he had only reached a 74% completion rate. It was unbelievable. No, that's not right. Shifeng suddenly snapped out of his daze. My mana manipulation hadn't been nearly as refined as it is now. I had glossed over some of the construction processes then, yet I still earned a 95% completion rate. This mana body sample is far more complex, but with my current standards, it shouldn't be this hard to achieve the same results. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You is my thirst for perfection having the opposite effect. Thinking up to this point, Shifeng began another attempt. This time, instead of trying to perfect all aspects of the construction process, he focused on certain parts while glossing over the rest. This time he completed the mana body in less than half an hour. The instant he completed his mana body, his 5 senses underwent a qualitative transformation. His affinity with the ambient mana skyrocketed. System: mana body constructed. Completion rate 91%. Do you wish to keep this mana body? Chapter 23:13 Prototype Domain I succeeded? Shifeng was momentarily stunned when he heard the system notification. He had never considered that he'd achieve a 91% completion rate. An epic mana body was many times more complex than a bronze-ranked version, and even achieving a 90% with a silver mana body was immensely difficult. There were very few players in God's domain that were capable of achieving a 90% completion rate with a gold mana body. As far as Shi Feng could remember, the player with the highest completion rate gold mana body had been Alice, the Witch of the West, in the past. She had managed to secure a peak gold mana body with a 98% completion rate. Of course, Alice was extraordinarily talented, which was why she had obtained such a high completion rate. Her manipulation of mana was simply godlike. Not even veteran domain realm experts could match her. Thanks to her powerful mana body, she had remained at the peak of God's domain even after becoming a Tier 6 mage god. The higher a mana body's completion rate, the more frighteningly powerful the mana body would be, especially for high-ranked mana bodies. Mana bodies might not provide any bonus basic attributes, but they offered significant increases to stamina and concentration recovery, defense and self-healing capabilities. A gold mana body with a 98% completion rate could even reinforce players' control over their mana, allowing them to exhibit greater power with their skills and spells. Because of this, Alice had undergone a qualitative transformation after reaching Tier 3. Her mana manipulation had already been impressive, and after receiving the boons from her mana body, she had been able to achieve a 100% completion rate with practically all of her Tier 3 spells. Most peak experts had only been able to maintain a 90% completion rate with their Tier 3 spells after arduous training, yet Alice managed to level out at 100% in a very short time. After reaching a 90% completion rate with a Tier 3 spell, every additional percentage would significantly increase the spell's power. At 100% completion rate, a player's Tier 3 spell could even contend with the spells Tier 3 heroes used. It was easy to imagine how devastating these spells would be against players. Although Shi Feng hadn't achieved a 98% completion rate, earning a 91% was beyond his expectations. "I'll keep it." Snapping out of his daze, Shi Feng promptly chose to keep his current mana body. There was no save option when constructing a mana body. If players gave up on a construction attempt, they'd have to start over. Hence, players had to have a clear goal in mind when constructing their mana body. Once they'd reached that goal, it would be wise to accept the mana body and avoid any further attempts. If one continued to seek a better outcome, they'd eventually run out of time and lose everything. Shi Feng had seen many players make that mistake in his previous life. The endless pursuit of perfection was the reason that many expert players had been forced to delete their accounts and begin again. While players could set up a stronger foundation by starting a new account, they'd also lose out on many opportunities. Others would have already explored the low-level maps, leaving little for new players. When starting a new account, players weren't guaranteed to become as powerful as they had been with their old one. While part of the reason that Shi Feng had achieved a 91% completion rate was his discovery of the correct thought process, luck was a larger part. He wasn't confident of repeating these results, and if he tried and earned an 89% completion rate, he'd just cry. There was a huge difference between a mana body with an 89% completion rate and one with a 90%. Mana bodies with a 75% completion rate or above wouldn't negatively affect players, and those with an 85% to 89% completion rate would receive a significant boost to their defense and stamina and concentration recovery. Mana bodies with a 90% to 94% completion rate, however, were considered top grade, and all of the aforementioned bonuses would be maxed out. If he had a high probability of achieving a 95% completion rate or above, another attempt might be worth the risk. A 93% or 94% completion rate wouldn't make much of a difference after all. However, he'd be ruined if he earned a completion rate below 90%. After Shi Feng accepted the mana body, the magic array around him flashed with a blinding light, and a horrific amount of mana gathered rapidly before flowing into him. As the torrent of mana filled him, Shi Feng felt like his body had been set on fire. The burning sensation was far more intense than it had been with his peak bronze mana body. But as his advanced epic mana body began to take shape, Shi Feng's perception of the world around him grew sharper. After 6 seconds, magic circuits began to surface across Shi Feng's body, and the ambient mana steadily gathered within him. Although the magic circuits faded away 2 seconds later, the mana didn't stop flowing into him. System, congratulations. You have become a Tier 3 Blade Saint and obtained an advanced epic mana body. All basic attributes plus 400, all resistance plus 80, attack power and attack speed increased by 30%, all basic attributes increased by 60%, and physique increased by 70%. Rewarding 80 legacy skill points. Finally, I got my body back. Shifeng was ecstatic as he felt the new changes. 3. He had spent nearly a decade as a Tier 3 player during his previous life, so he was most familiar with this tier. Now that he had recovered to his peak, he could finally exhibit his true combat power. While Shifeng basked in the familiar strength, he noticed that his perception had become drastically sharper than before. He could even sense the flow of mana in the air. A prototype domain. The sensation astonished Shifeng. Is this an advanced epic mana body's ability? Previously, he'd only been able to perceive such details within a 30-yard radius around him by relying on his 5 senses. Now, however, his perception had extended to 50 yards away. Moreover, he felt like an absolute overlord within the 50-yard radius. Of course, he didn't actually have control over this area. He only had rudimentary control of the ambient mana. Even so, this was a prototype domain. A domain operated on the principle of controlling the mana in a specific area to create a miniature world that favored the player. Although he couldn't suppress his enemies with a prototype domain, he could manipulate the ambient mana and reduce the mana density where his enemies stood. The decreased density wouldn't affect players' basic attributes, but it would impact their concentration in battle. Such an ability would definitely grant him an edge in combat. Moreover, he could sense that his stamina and concentration recovery rates had improved by at least 70% due to his new mana body. He had also become tough enough that not even full-powered attacks from a secret silver weapon could easily injure him. In other words, if a player wielding a secret silver weapon struck the unprotected parts of his body, their damage would be reduced to the lowest possible value as if they had struck a piece of armor. Now that he had obtained his mana body, Shifeng opened his legacy skill menu to check for new skills. There were over 20 Tier 3 skills available, and every one of them required at least 20 legacy skill points to learn. Some of the more powerful skills even required 50 points. Players that had failed to collect legacy skill points from unconventional means would be fortunate to learn 2 Tier 3 skills upon reaching Tier 3. Fortunately, that wasn't the case for Shifeng. With the points he had saved up thus far and the points he just obtained, he had nearly 100 legacy skill points to spend. Shifeng immediately spent 40 legacy skill points to upgrade Blade Liberation and Blade Awakening to Tier 3. He then spent another 50 points to learn Void Slash, the strongest skill a Tier 3 Blade Saint could learn. Void Slash, action type, requires Sword Tier 3, proficiency needed to upgrade to Tier 4. 0/100, 000. Manipulate the power of the void to execute 6 slashes. Each slash carries 150% of user's strength and causes 200% divine damage. User may transfer to the location of any of the 6 slashes. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU cooldown. 8 seconds. Not only did Tier 3 skills possess greater raw power than Tier 2 skills, but they were also more capable of injuring high-tiered monsters. However, Tier 3 skills had very long cooldowns. Those with immense power and short cooldowns like Void Slash were exceptionally rare. Normally, players tried to learn several Tier 3 skills and link them together to make up for the long cooldowns. However, with Void Slash alone, Shifeng could exhibit nearly the full potential DPS of a Tier 3 player. Now that I've reached Tier 3, it's time I lead everyone to a level 100 neutral map. With his new strength, Shifeng was confident that he could eliminate a level 100 Great Lord, even without Anna and Kite's help. Chapter 23:14, Tier 3 Powerhouse. When Shifeng left the library, he made his way toward the Adventurers Association. Although he was now officially a Tier 3 player, he still needed to register his achievement at the Adventurers Association to gain the appropriate certification. Gaining Tier 3 certification at the Adventurers Association was very important. Not only would it allow players to accept high-ranked quests appropriate for their tier, but they would also be acknowledged as true powerhouses in God's domain. They would then qualify to raid the monarch bosses in neutral maps and become the area's ruler. This was also why the various powers had been so desperate to get their members to Tier 3 in the past. The Tier 3 turning point didn't simply differentiate experts from each other. It also determined whether or not one qualified to become a true overlord. After all, the various powers' true battlefield for hegemony in God's domain was in level 100+ neutral maps. Initially, Shifeng had planned to establish a guild town in a level 100 neutral map and steadily progressing towards lordship. But now that the planar passages had opened, and adventurer alliances had formed sooner than he had expected, he needed a more efficient plan. The planar passages activation hadn't just accelerated independent players' leveling speed. It had done so for the various powers as well. Now he didn't have as much time to conquer level 100+ neutral maps. Zero Wing wasn't like the various superpowers. It lacked the manpower and resources to secure a foundation in level 100 neutral maps as quickly as superpowers could. Moreover, Zero Wing wouldn't be able to secure as much territory as the various superpowers. To establish a guild town in a level 100 neutral map, the ruling power would need to station a large number of players in the map long term. Level 100 neutral maps were very far away from kingdoms and empires, considered free zones that were outside of any kingdom or empire's protection. In addition, NPCs weren't particularly interested in visiting these guild towns due to the neutral map's harsh environments. As a result, very few NPCs would apply as soldiers, and those that did would ask for exorbitant salaries. Hence, unlike in guild towns within kingdoms, empires and low-level neutral maps, players had to handle the majority of their guild towns' defenses in level 100 neutral maps. This was also why guilds that wanted to secure a foothold in level 100+ neutral maps needed to upgrade their towns into guild cities as quickly as possible. They'd only be able to solidify their rule over the map with a guild city. After all, not only would guilds have to face monster assaults, but they'd also have to deal with enemy powers. Establishing rule in a level 100+ neutral map was already an intense challenge for guilds, and it would be especially difficult for Zero Wing, which lacked certain foundational aspects. The only solution Shifeng could think of was to become a lord. As a lord, players would have full authority over the territory they controlled, and they'd be able to recruit various neutral race NPCs. A lord could also establish their own knight division. The NPCs players could recruit for a knight division were different from the NPC soldiers one could hire to protect a guild town. They were more akin to personal guards, and players could recruit these knights from various kingdoms and empires, nurturing them as they did personal guards. Once a player became a lord of a land, they could recruit up to 5,000 knights. Although that didn't seem like a lot, these knights were bona fide NPCs and would be immensely helpful when defending a guild's territories. While Shifeng traveled toward the Adventurers Association, he called Blackie. "Blackie, how are things coming along in the Northern Fortress?" Shifeng asked. He had spent quite a lot of time completing his promotion quest. Although he had told Blackie and the others not to contact him unless something important happened, and he hadn't received any calls, he refused to believe that Dragonheart Island's various superpowers were content to sit by and watch while Zero Wing earned a ton of profits from its newfound gold mine. The fortress's player population has already reached 1,500,000, and we're earning roughly 14,000 ancient gold per day. Dragonheart Island's various powers are practically dying with envy, especially War Blood. Because of the Northern Fortress's benefits, almost no one is visiting War Blood's Rock Nest Fortress. Blood Oath is likely losing his mind right now, Blackie said, chuckling. Also, as per your instructions, I purchased a plot of land near the World Tower a few days ago, and I bought a guild residence in Dragonheart City's inner area, so our guild has a temporary resting point in the city. Hearing how much Blackie had purchased over the last few days, Shifeng sighed ruefully. He had considered several thousand ancient gold an astronomical sum in his past life, yet now he earned 14,000 ancient gold each day from the Northern Fortress alone. It was no wonder why the various superpowers had fought so hard to capture the Gravity Mountain Range's fortresses in the past. However, Dragonheart Island's powers have been developing rapidly due to the planar passages opening. Quite a few superpowers now have their own small fortresses, and based on the reports I've received, War Blood, Starlink and 13 Thrones are marching toward the Southern Tower Medium Fortress, Blackie said worriedly. If they're successful, we'll likely see a significant decrease to the Northern Fortress's income. It certainly won't benefit our development in Dragonheart City. Why don't we capture a few more fortresses, guild leader? Zero Wing now had quite a bit of manpower in the Gravity Mountain range. With Phoenix Rain's subordinates protecting the northern fortress, they had enough strength to capture the other fortresses. The Gravity Mountain range only had so many fortresses. If they captured a few more, they should be able to maintain 70% to 80% of their profits, even if the northern fortress's income decreased. Let the other powers fight for the fortresses. We only need the northern fortress, Shifeng said, chuckling. Also, notify all of the main force members to gather in White River City. We'll be heading to a level 100 neutral map. That's where we really need to be right now. The Gravity Mountain range was an excellent place for players to grind for levels and resources right now, but it couldn't help players rise to prominence. A level 100 neutral map? Blackie's eyes glowed when he heard Shifeng's plan. All right. I'll notify them right away. The Gravity Mountain range had bountiful resources, but it paled in comparison to unexplored level 100 neutral maps. Moreover, Zero Wing's main force members would benefit more from grinding in level 100 neutral maps at their levels than they would from grinding in the Gravity Mountain range. After disconnecting the call, Blackie began to gather Zero Wing's main force members and head toward White River City. Meanwhile, Shifeng arrived at the Adventurers Association. The Adventurers Association was quite lively at the moment, with just as many visiting players as the city's auction house. The auction house wasn't the only construction that transformed after White River City's promotion. The Adventurers Association had similarly undergone a metamorphosis and now contained a lot more NPCs who visited to consign quests. Some of these quests included those in high-level neutral maps and escort quests to the kingdom's borders. If one were lucky, they might even find crusade quests to slay monsters in neutral maps. With the opportunity to earn both equipment and money available, the Adventurers Association had become a hub for many independent players. As Shifeng entered the first floor hall, he was greeted by the sight of a ton of level 90+ players. Now, not even the Adventurers Associations in imperial capitals could compare to the prosperity the association in White River City enjoyed. Pushing his way through the crowd, Shifeng quickly made his way to the second floor hall and applied for his certification as a Tier 3 adventurer. After completing the process in a VIP reception room, the Adventurers Association officially recognized Shifeng as a Tier 3 powerhouse. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You Lord Bronze Legatee, is there anything else I can help you with today? The elven woman who had received him asked, smiling. I wish to see the Monarch Crusade quests for Cold Spring Forest, Shifeng declared. Cold Spring Forest was the closest level 100 neutral map to Starmoon Kingdom, and it was one of the few level 100 maps with a relatively comfortable environment. Many Tier 2 players had grinded in the Cold Spring Forest after reaching level 100 in the past, including Shifeng himself. However, the various superpowers had taken control of the map's 6 regions by the time he had reached Tier 3. Now that he was the first Tier 3 player in the game, he couldn't miss this opportunity. Chapter 23:15 Ice Dragon Heathwaite. After Shifeng made his request, the Elven administrator made a quick trip to the Adventurers Association's reference room and returned with 7 parchment scrolls. Lord Bronze Legatee, here are the crusade quests you've requested. Here is the information on all 7 of Cold Spring Forest's monarchs, the Elven administrator said as she placed the scrolls on the table. 7 monarchs? Shifeng was a little surprised when he saw the 7 ancient scrolls. In God's domain, only one monarch would manage a region, and as far as he knew, Cold Spring Forest only consisted of 6 regions. This meant that there should only be 6 monarchs. He had never heard of a 7th. My lord, I have to remind you that you may only accept 1 crusade quest. Whether or you succeed or fail, you may only accept another crusade quest after 10 days. The materials needed to create the transfer stones are quite expensive as well. Please choose wisely, the Elven administrator explained. Shifeng had already known all of that, and nodding silently, he began to inspect the scrolls. He wanted to know if the information he had obtained during his previous life had changed. If Cold Spring Forest's monarchs had massively changed due to his reincarnation, his plans would come to an abrupt end. A monarch was no ordinary field boss. They might not be as powerful as level 100+ world bosses, but they were considered superior mythic monsters. They could kill tier 3 players as effortlessly as squishing ants. Trying to raid such a boss with a tier 3100-man team the same level would be futile. Players needed to rely on special means to raid a monarch. After browsing through the information for 10 or so minutes, Shifeng breathed a sigh of relief. Thank goodness everything's the same as I remembered. The only difference is the extra monarch. But even as he sighed, his gaze was glued on the extra monarch's information. The 7th monarch was part of the legendary dragon race, the ice dragon Heathwaite. Meanwhile, the region Heathwaite ruled over was the Cold Spring Canyon, which was located in the Cold Spring Forest Central region. Cold Spring Canyon had been quite famous in the past in God's domain due to the extremely rare Arctic water it produced. Arctic water was one of the few items in God's domain that could improve a player's adaptability to their environment. The effects might not be astounding, and the item was useless to players with gold mana bodies or better, but it would be tremendously helpful to tier 2 players when they challenged their tier 3 promotion quests. This was why so many powers had fought for control of the Cold Spring Canyon during Shifeng's previous life. Shifeng had never dreamed that someone could actually rule over the Cold Spring Canyon. Without any more hesitation, Shifeng accepted the crusade quest to hunt the ice dragon Heathwaite. Are you sure you wish to accept this quest, Lord Bronze Legatee? We only have one transfer stone connected to the ice dragon's lair left. If you fail this quest, you will not be able to accept it again in the future, the elven administrator warned when Shifeng selected the crusade quest that had remained untouched for over a century. I'll take it, Shifeng said with determination. He'd have a high chance of success with hunting the other monarchs thanks to his memories, but the Cold Spring Canyon was simply too valuable to give up. Technically, he could hunt one of the other 6 monarchs first and raid the ice dragon after the 10-day wait. But covering one area would be quite taxing on the guild with Zero Wing's current standards. Zero Wing simply couldn't manage 2 areas. Since he was limited to a single area, he had to choose the best option available. Even if he failed, he could prevent another power from obtaining the Cold Spring Canyon. The cost to teleport to Heathwaite's lair is quite high. You will have to pay 10,000 gold and 20,000 magic crystals as a deposit. If you complete the quest, we will return the deposit in full, as well as pay you your deserved remuneration. If you fail, however, your deposit will be forfeit, the elven administrator said seriously. That's fine. Shifeng had already prepared for this cost. He handed the elven administrator the deposit in exchange for a gray-white crystal. This crystal was none other than the transfer stone for the ice dragon's lair. After obtaining the transfer stone, Shifeng made his way to the candlelight trading firm to retrieve some of the dark gold weapons that had been stored there. He then upgraded the abyssal blade to level 90, which was as high as he could upgrade the magic weapon right now. Level 95 weapons were still considered a luxury, not to mention level 95 dark gold weapons. Fortunately, the abyssal blade's attack power and attributes were only slightly lower than those of a level 100 epic weapon, despite the fact that it was only a level 90 magic weapon. The abyssal blade would be more than enough for Shifeng's needs. Shifeng then visited the candlelight trading firm's second basement floor, which was where he stored his most important items. A guild residence was quite secure, but the candlelight trading firm in White River City was many times safer than Zero Wing's guild hall. At this point, only tier 4 players would have any hope of breaking past the shop's defenses. At this moment, an NPC guard stood before the warehouse on the second basement floor. He was a level 100 tier 3 fine gold guard, and unless one had permission, not even a tier 3 apex expert would get past him. The candlelight trading firm's defenses were impressively strict. With the help of the Grandmaster Forger Celiora, Shifeng had previously recast the disintegration armor, a piece of legendary equipment, yet despite being unfinished, it was too powerful for Shifeng to use. Moreover, carrying the disintegration armor on him wasn't safe, so he had stored it in the candlelight trading firm's underground warehouse. First, he didn't want to risk losing it, even if the chance of it dropping upon his death was negligible. Second, even after recasting it, the disintegration armor's aura would still attract ores, especially powerful high-tiered ores. If he had attracted a powerful ore's attention as a tier 2 player, he would have been helpless. Furthermore, he couldn't equip it yet. He had coveted legendary items for a long time. He had heard countless stories of players who owned a legendary item in his previous life. There were tales of Tier 4 players defeating Tier 5 players and Tier 5 players slaying Tier 6 God-ranked players. One player had even soloed a Tier 5 dragon. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yet the piece of legendary equipment he had gone to great lengths to obtain was an unfinished product, and its minimum use requirement was Tier 3. To make matters worse, he hadn't even been able to inspect its attribute panel until he had reached Tier 3. Holding onto the disintegration armor would have only frustrated him. Now that he had finally reached Tier 3 and met the minimum requirements to equip the disintegration armor, it was time to retrieve it. With a piece of legendary equipment, defeating the ice dragon Heathwaite would be far easier. Legendary items could, after all, allow players to transcend tiers, and as a Tier 3 player he should be able to contend with a Tier 4 ice dragon with the disintegration armor equipped. Once he entered the warehouse and arrived before the disintegration armor, Shifeng chanted an incantation to release the seal protecting it. As soon as the seal faded, crimson energy pulsed away from the pitch-black chest piece, spreading. A pressure that would even make Tier 2 experts uncomfortable began to fill the warehouse. As the disintegration armor's aura swept over him, Shifeng felt his blood begin to boil as bloodlust wormed its way into his mind. Taking several seconds to suppress the maddening feeling, Shifeng tapped on the disintegration armor to inspect its attribute panel. Chapter 23:16 Armor of Legends. Space itself faintly began to crumble as it was exposed to the disintegration armor's disintegration power. Despite having reached Tier 3, the moment Shifeng touched the armor, he could feel the mana in his right arm vibrate and felt signs of it beginning to break down. Mana dispersal. The sensation in Shifeng's right arm stunned him. He hadn't had a particularly clear idea of what the disintegration armor had done to him when he had been Tier 2. He had only felt a strong, stifling pressure from the armor. Now that he was Tier 3, however, he could sense the disintegration power blocking and destroying the mana within him. After a slight touch, the mana density in his right arm had significantly decreased. If he maintained contact with the disintegration armor for a long period, it would utterly destroy the mana that coated his body. Losing this mana coating didn't seem like a major problem, but it would deal a fatal blow to Tier 3 players and above. After reaching Tier 3, a player's mana body would drive every action they took in God's domain. If their mana body couldn't conduct mana, they'd be as good as crippled. The mana body played a crucial role when players used Tier 3 skills and spells. Without a working mana body, activating those abilities would be nearly impossible. Naturally, the difference between the combat power a Tier 3 player could display with Tier 3 skills and spells and a Tier 3 player who couldn't would be obvious at a glance. Once Shifeng had tapped on the disintegration armor, its attribute panel appeared before him. Disintegration armor, unfinished product. Chest plate, legendary rank. Equipment requirement: Strength 9000, Agility 7000. Tier requirement: Tier 3 Divine Defense plus 15,000, affected by player's level. All basic attributes plus 1000, affected by player's level and tier. Physique increased by 100%, affected by player's tier. When equipped, Strength increased by 120%, Agility increased by 100%, and Endurance increased by 100%. All resistance plus 300. Magic resistance increased by 40%. Mana body's effects increased by 50%. Ignore levels plus 30. All item level requirements reduced by 10 levels. Additional passive skill: Disintegration body. Reduces the damage from Tier 3 or below attacks by 70%. Reduces damage from Tier 4 or above attacks by 40%. Immune to all control effects. Weakens stiffening effects by 70. And increases reaction speed by 20%. Additional active skill 1, Disintegration field. Disintegrates all skills and spells within a 100-yard radius. Skills and spells at Tier 2 and below will be nullified, while skills and spells above Tier 2 will be weakened by 60%. All entities within range will suffer a 40% reduction to basic attributes, physique and stamina, in addition to a 400% increase to their stamina and concentration consumption rates. No cooldown. Additional active skill 2, Disintegration power. gathers all of the disintegration armor's power and temporarily sacrifice all of its attributes to upgrade user by 1 tier for 60 seconds. Cooldown, 12 hours, cannot be stacked with skills and spells of similar effect. The disintegration armor is a divine armor that the Or Empire's founding emperor had created with various divine items. This armor had been destroyed during a battle against gods. The disintegration armor has recovered a portion of its original strength after Celiora recast the chest piece using a blood contract. Due to the armor's disintegration power, the armor's attributes suffer an 80% reduction when equipped. If equipped by the blood contractor, the armor's attributes will only be reduced by 50%. God crystals required to repair the disintegration armor fully, 0/10. Amazing. Shifeng's eyes glowed as he read the disintegration armor's attribute panel. Before this, he hadn't had a clear idea of what a true legendary item's attributes would look like. He had only heard of legendary items during his previous life. He hadn't actually seen a real legendary item's attribute panel since anyone with such an item had rightfully kept a tight lid on its abilities. Although the disintegration armor was an unfinished product, it was the strongest piece of equipment he had ever laid eyes on. Even Gentle Snow's fragmented legendary ranked 7 Luminaries battle armor was far weaker than this chest piece. The 7 Luminaries battle armor had originally been a legendary item, but after taking significant damage, its rank had fallen. And yet, despite being a damaged piece of armor as well, the disintegration armor was leagues stronger than the 7 Luminaries battle armor in all aspects. The fact that the disintegration armor granted divine defense, rather than a simple boost to ordinary defense, was particularly astounding. This meant that even skills and spells that dealt true damage wouldn't be as effective against the disintegration armor's wearer. It would also reduce lower-tiered players' damage, and higher-tiered players wouldn't be able to deal any additional damage due to their tier advantage. Divine defense was the highest grade of defense in God's domain. It's a pity that the armor is so badly damaged. Even if I equip it, I'll only exhibit a fraction of its true might. If I could display the disintegration armor's full power, dealing with the ice dragon would be a piece of cake, Shifeng thought. The disintegration power's instability limited the armor's true strength. At the armor's peak, Shifeng could likely defeat the mythic-ranked ice dragon head-on with the additional 100% physique and 120% strength. Even so, Shifeng was overjoyed that he could finally equip the disintegration armor. A piece of legendary equipment. Countless players, including Apex experts, dreamed of equipping such an item. Legendary items were simply too rare in God's domain. Just obtaining a single clue that might lead to one required an astronomical amount of manpower and resources. In some cases, these clues would only lead to a fragment of a legendary item. Players would then have to find the remaining fragments and invest even more resources to repair it. Unless one were ridiculously lucky or had particularly powerful support, getting their hands on a legendary item would be utterly impossible. Now Shifeng finally had a legendary item of his own, and he could even equip it now. The disintegration armor's attributes might be halved, but it was still slightly more powerful than a piece of fragmented legendary equipment. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Shifeng immediately equipped the disintegration armor. The 9,000 strength and 7,000 agility were incredibly difficult requirements to meet. Even a Tier 3 player in full top-tier equipment would have to wait until level 120 to fulfill them, but it wasn't an issue for Shifeng. Not only did he have an advanced bloodline, but he also wielded one of the 10 Great Saint legacies. Furthermore, he carried a magic weapon and multiple fragmented legendary items. Meeting the two requirements at level 100 was actually quite easy for him. The instant Shifeng equipped the disintegration armor, he felt power course through him. His basic attributes skyrocketed and his perception considerably improved. Even his mind felt far clearer than before. If he fought Erdia, a titled Tier 3 heroic spirit, in his current condition, he'd have a high chance of defeating the undead. It's about time to leave. Glancing at the time, Shifeng realized it was time to meet up with Blackie and the others. He activated the Nightwalker's Cape's Nightwalker skill to conceal the disintegration armor's aura and information before heading toward White River City's teleportation hall. Chapter 23:17 Shadowless Empire. White River City's teleportation hall. Once in the teleportation hall, Shifeng made his way to one of the high-class bars on the third floor. Blackie and the others had been waiting for some time now. When they noticed Shifeng enter the establishment, they stood surprised. Yan Tianxing and Yi Luofei were particularly shocked as their guild leader pulled their attention away from their 10 gold bottles of 5-colored fruit wine. So, this is a Tier 3 class? Blackie had already informed the group that Shifeng had left to challenge his Tier 3 promotion quest, and none of them had been particularly surprised. Shifeng had already reached level 100, so it was expected that he'd challenge his promotion quest. Although Shifeng's Nightwalker's cape concealed his aura, it couldn't hide the fact that the ambient mana actively flowed toward him. God's domain did have weapons and equipment that would attract mana to their user, but those items generally only increased the mana density around the player. However, despite so much mana flowing toward Shifeng, Yan Tianxing, whose senses were quite sharp, and Yi Luofei, who was a magical class player and only a step away from reaching the domain realm, recognized that the mana density around Shifeng hadn't actually increased. It felt as if the swordsman were a black hole, steadily devouring the ambient mana. Mana was the root of all in God's domain. A player's physical and mental conditions, skills, and spells were all closely tied to mana. As players at the peak of God's domain, Yan Tianxing and Yi Luofei had spent a considerable amount of time researching the game's mechanics, especially the relationship between mana and a player's virtual body. Players constantly absorbed mana from their environments, and as players' physiques grew stronger, they'd absorb more mana. This was why areas with thin or no mana were considered forbidden lands. As a Tier 3 player, Shifeng's mana absorption was astounding. If the mana that flowed into Tier 2 players was like a small creek, the mana flowing into Shifeng was a raging river. Everyone's here, guild leader. We can set off when you're ready, Blackie excitedly reported. Thanks to the Northern Fortress, Zero Wing's overall strength had increased considerably. Not only did the Northern Fortress provide the huge ancient gold profits, but it also gave players a place where they could rapidly grow stronger. By this point, Zero Wing had explored multiple ancient ruins in the Gravity Mountain Range's northern region, securing plenty of precious treasure. The guild's main force members had also reached level 97 and 98 and had upgraded most of their equipment with level 95 dark gold equipment. However, their combat standards had improved far faster than their levels and equipment. As many as 26 main force members had now reached the Truth Realm. Yan Tianxing and Yi Luofei had even reached the Ascension Realm. In addition, Alluring Summer, Silent Blade, Shadow Sword, Stubborn Bone, and Zhao Yueru had entered the Flowing Water Realm thanks to Unyielding Soul's legacy training slots. Seeing how much his comrades had improved, Shifeng was a little surprised. He hadn't expected them to grow so strong so quickly. Now Zero Wing's main force was likely only a little weaker than Superpower's main forces. If Fire Dance and the others could make some progress in the Tower of Four Gods, Zero Wing's main force might even be able to stand toe-to-toe with the various Superpowers' main forces. Alright, let's go. Shifeng nodded as he joined the team. He led everyone to a teleportation array and traveled to the border town closest to the Cold Spring Forest. He then used the 7 Luminaries Ring's spatial gate to transport the team the rest of the way. Cold Spring Forest was a level 100 neutral map, as well as a junction to other level 100+ neutral maps. Thus, it was quite far from civilization. Players would have to cross over a dozen large maps to reach the Cold Spring Forest from Starmoon Kingdom. Getting there was especially troublesome without a flying mount. Of course, Shifeng had the Thunder Eagle and the 7 Luminaries Ring. After teleporting multiple times, Shifeng and his team finally arrived before the cave that led to the Cold Spring Forest. The Cold Spring Forest was meant to help players transition from Tier 2 to Tier 3, unlike other level 100 neutral maps with harsh environments. Not only was this a comfortable area for players to grind, but it was also home to a large number of ancient races. The forest was also under an ancient seal's protection, so players would have to defeat the map's guardian boss and remove the seal before they could explore the map. Even with a flying mount, entering the map was impossible without completing those tasks. Guild leader, I see people. Minor Wind, who had long since reached both the Refinement Realm and Truth Realm, quickly discovered players' tracks as they arrived before the cave. It looks like there's a lot of them. I'm guessing these tracks are from a 200-man team. Others have already found this place? Shifeng was stunned. Although this cave wasn't as dangerous as a level 100 neutral map, the monsters within were still level 97 plus lords and great lords. Quite a few grand lords wandered within the cave as well. Surviving here was no easy task. In addition, the cave was particularly dark, suppressing players' five senses to a certain degree. A 100-man team of current experts wouldn't last more than 10 minutes inside the cave. Even a superpower's main force would struggle to get through. There were simply too many monsters, especially since the cave should still be largely unexplored. Guild leader, should we head inside? Blackie asked. They were trying to maintain a level of secrecy. If they encountered other players, news of their operation would spread. Although they were only heading out to explore a level 100 neutral map, which shouldn't be much of a problem, they couldn't guarantee that other powers wouldn't try to take advantage of their operation. No need to worry. Let's just go, Shifeng said, shaking his head. Even if other powers learned that they were exploring the Cold Spring Forest, they couldn't cause any problems for Zero Wing's team. Other players weren't even guaranteed to get through the cave and into the forest, much less take advantage of the operation. Following which, with Kola, Yiwumian and Turtledove led the way into the cave. Visibility was poor in the dimly lit cave. Even Tier 2 players could only see up to 200 yards away, and dodging ranged attacks from multiple directions would be particularly challenging in the cave's narrow, maze-like structure. Fortunately, Zero Wing's main force members had trained in the Extraordinary Tower, so they coped with the cave monsters' ambushes relatively well. With an MT like Kola leading the way, the team had little issue pushing through the cave quickly. They didn't have to come to a halt to deal with the monsters. The cave had 2 floors, and after 3 hours Shifeng and his comrades finally reached the second floor. This was also where they'd find the Guardian boss. Unlike the first floor, the second floor was an open canyon. It was so large that a large team wouldn't have to worry about needing room for their usual formations in battle. Moreover, the second floor was much brighter than the first. However, the suppression on players' senses had increased in exchange. Less than 30 minutes after reaching the second floor, Shifeng and his team heard explosions and noticed dazzling lights at the end of the tunnel. The tunnel led to a cavern which contained a town. Zero Wing's main force found a 200-man team clearing out the demonkin soldiers and guards that guarded the town, while gradually approaching an ancient giant in the town's center. Every player on the 200-man team was level 96 or above, and they all wore a dark mark on their foreheads. They also radiated a faint, black glow. Even as they fought the High Lord-ranked demonkin soldiers one-on-one, these players had an overwhelming advantage. Not even the Great Lord-ranked demonkin guards could halt these players' advance for more than a moment. As for the ancient giant in the town's center, it stood at over a dozen meters tall and had 6 arms. Each of the giant's hands held a pitch-black spear, and it loomed like the ancient god of destruction. Demonkin Soldier, Dark Creature High Lord, Level 98 HP 49, 000/49, 000/000, Demonkin Guard, Dark Creature Great Lord, Level 99 HP 88, 000/000/88, 000/000, Purgatory Giant, Dark Giant Mythic, Level 99 HP 460, 000/460, 000/000, Guild Leader. They look like Shadowless Empire's members. It's an adventurer team from the Shadow World, Blackie said, quickly discerning the players' identities once he saw them. Shadowless Empire? It's no wonder why those two are here. Shifeng thought, spotting a familiar man and woman at the lead of the small army. Blackie's comment reminded him of exactly who those two were. Shadowless Empire had been a very famous superpower during his previous life. It had taken over the Shadow World even before the planar passages had opened. With the excellent leveling resources and special legacies the Shadow World contained, Shadowless Empire had flourished wonderfully after arriving on the main continent. 2 of Shadowless Empire's members in particular had forced the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion into a disadvantageous position during a contest for territory in level 100+ neutral maps. Those 2 were the same man and woman that led Shadowless Empire's 200-man team. They were the Dark Assassin Vast Lock and the Shadowless Ranger Night Reader. These 2 players hadn't reached the Domain Realm Empire before moving to God's Domain's main continent, Yet even domain realm experts had been terrified of their assassination capabilities. Once they had reached the domain realm, they had been akin to demon kings in the dark. Those two had been responsible for plenty of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's losses, even going as far as stealing one of the pavilion's territories. Meanwhile, shortly after Zero Wings members discovered Shadowless Empire's team, Shadowless Empire's members noticed them as well. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Commander, those are Zero Wings members. Should we get rid of them? A level 96 Dark Berserker asked, making a throat-cutting gesture as he glanced at Zero Wing's main force. I hadn't thought Zero Wing would reach this place. It's no wonder why everyone's insisted that Starlink and the various superpowers can't seem to deal with the guild, Night Reader said, chuckling. Night Reader was a slender woman with vibrant red hair. She wore epic chainmail and wielded an ancient crimson bow as well. It's a pity that their era in God's domain has come to an end. Zero Wing is simply wasting its time by coming here. Because the Shadow World lacked top-tier weapons and equipment, Shadowless Empire's equipment standards had been lacking when they had first arrived on the main continent. However, their equipment standards had undergone a qualitative transformation rather quickly, and Shadowless Empire's members had caught up with the main continent's players. With their advantage in terms of legacies, levels, and combat standards, not even the various superpowers with vast foundations were a match for Shadowless Empire now. As for the main continent's non-superpowers, they were utterly helpless before Shadowless Empire's strength. When he heard Night Reader's comment, the bald youth leading the team, Vastlock, nodded his agreement. Ignore them and prioritize killing the Purgatory Giant. They'll know what to do once they realize the difference between our strengths, Vastlock said. He returned to commanding his team as they advanced on the Purgatory Giant. Chapter 23:18 Sword rises after Vastlock declared his decision. Shadowless Empire's 200-man team accelerated their advance toward the Purgatory Giant, completely ignoring Shifeng and the others' existence. These people really don't care about us at all. Yen Tianxing could not help but shake his head and chuckle when he saw Shadowless Empire's members' nonchalant reaction toward Zero Wing's arrival. Normally, when players came across other players out in the fields, especially when they were raiding a boss, they would give out a reminder or warning to the approaching players. However, Shadowless Empire's members simply treated Zero Wing's team as if it were air and did not even bother trying to make contact. The only explanation for such a reaction was that Shadowless Empire had deemed them to be no threat and not worthy of any attention whatsoever. Guild leader, are we really not going to make a move? Blackie asked as he looked at the distant Purgatory Giant. He did not particularly care about Shadowless Empire's treatment of them. However, since the guardian boss of this cave served as the key to the Cold Spring Forest, its loot might provide them with some help once they entered the neutral map. We're only traveling toward the Cold Spring Forest. Having someone to open up a path for us is a good thing, Shifeng said, chuckling. He then instructed everyone to get some rest first. He had no intention of snatching the boss from Shadowless Empire at all. The Purgatory Giant was indeed a very important boss. After killing it, not only would players gain access to the Cold Spring Forest, but they would also obtain a special item called Purgatory Core. When activated, the Purgatory Core would create a natural barrier with a 200-yard radius that would help players adapt to level 100 neutral maps. The barrier's effects were similar to Arctic Water, except that Arctic Water was only effective for one player while the Purgatory Core applied to a specific area. For Tier 2 teams looking to grind in level 100+ neutral maps, the Purgatory Core was a very useful item. Killing the Purgatory Giant provided no other benefits aside from these two. Meanwhile, his goal was to kill the Ice Dragon Heathwaite and occupy the Cold Spring Canyon. To him, the Purgatory Core held no meaning. After all, once he occupied the Cold Spring Canyon, he could obtain Arctic Water much more easily. At that time, let alone a 100-man team, even strengthening a 1,000-man team wouldn't be difficult. I guess you're right. Blackie nodded as he found Shifeng's words reasonable. He then sat down on the ground and started recovering his stamina and concentration. The Purgatory Giant was a level 99 mythic boss. Moreover, it belonged to the giant race. Its life rating was considerably high, so raiding it would not be easy. Since Shadowless Empire was willing to raid it for them, They could use this opportunity to conserve their strength for the cold spring forest. While Zero Wings members rested in a distant location, Shadowless Empire's members, who were only 500 yards away from the Purgatory Giant now, also noticed what Zero Wings members were doing. It seems these people are quite smart. Had they dared try to snatch the boss, I'd make sure they got a good beating. A level 96 Dark Berserker said, smirking when he saw Zero Wings members sitting down and resting. I doubt that's the case. I bet they want to use us to test the Purgatory Giant's prowess, so that they can have an easier time raiding it afterward, Night Reader said as she glanced at Shifeng and the others, a bright smile blooming on her face. It's a pity that they're looking down on us too much. Shadowless Empire was the ruler of the entire Shadow World. Its capabilities were far beyond anything the main continent's various superpowers could imagine. Although the Shadow World was only the size of a kingdom, as one of the higher standard otherworlds, it possessed resources that many superpowers coveted. However, despite the superpowers' numerous attempts to seize the Shadow World, Shadowless Empire always emerged victorious. Alright, focus. The boss has already sensed us. Everyone get ready. Vast Lock suddenly shouted when he saw the Purgatory Giant opening its eyes. The Purgatory Giant's awakening immediately panicked the wandering Demonkin soldiers and Demonkin guards. The moment the Purgatory Giant opened its eyes, everyone present felt a horrific aura wash over them, even Zero Wings members who sat several thousand yards away. Based on its aura, the Purgatory Giant was definitely much stronger than ordinary mythic monsters. Moreover, space within a 500-yard radius of the Purgatory Giant started changing upon the Guardian Boss's awakening, the gravel on the ground shattering. After awakening, the Purgatory Giant immediately advanced toward Shadowless Empire's members and thrust its 6 spears at them, the spears tearing apart the space they passed through. Just as the 6 spears were about to reach Shadowless Empire's members, 6 shield-bearing Dark Knights jumped forward and met the spears in battle, the bodies of these Dark Knights radiating a bright black light while the dark mark on their foreheads glowed a faint crimson. A series of explosions echoed throughout the entire tattered town. After receiving the Purgatory Giant's spear, each of the 6 Dark Knights stumbled only 3 or 4 steps back before stabilizing their bodies. They also lost only 25% or so of their HP, which was quickly regenerated thanks to the rear line healers. When the Purgatory Giant started launching its second round of attacks, the 6 Dark Knights had yet to recover their balance. At this time, however, 6 more Dark Knights emerged from Shadowless Empire's TED to block the Purgatory Giant's spears. Like so, the 2 parties of MTs took turns receiving the Purgatory Giant's attacks, their coordination perfect. Due to their perfect execution and timing, the 12 MTs prevented the Purgatory Giant from inflicting any harm on the rest of the team. Start! Vast Lock shouted. Upon hearing Vast Lock's command, the Cursemancers at the rear line immediately cast Dark Devour. In the next moment, a black puddle formed beneath the Purgatory Giant's feet, the black liquid continuously crawling up the giant and threatening to consume it. Although the spell did not deal any damage, it applied a significant speed debuff. This situation instantly reduced the pressure on the team. Immediately after, Shadowless Empire's members started bombarding the boss in a frenzy. Taking the lead to attack, Night Reader drew her Crimson Bow and sent a crimson light pillar shooting at the Purgatory Giant. Minus 331,564. With just one attack, Night Reader halted the movement of one of the Purgatory Giant's arms. At this time, Vast Lock had also made his way to the Purgatory Giant's back and stabbed his 2 pitch-black glowing daggers at the mythic boss. The instant the 2 daggers touched the Purgatory Giant's skin, 2 black beams pierced through the boss, each beam causing over minus 200,000 damage. The basic attributes of these people are high. Every one of them is like a great lord. This is especially true for that assassin and ranger. Those 2 are most likely superior to great lords of the same level in terms of basic attributes. Moreover, these people can perfectly combine their combat techniques with their skills and spells. It's no wonder they're so confident in taking down the Purgatory Giant, Yan Tianxing praised as he watched Shadowless Empire's members fight. At this stage of the game, the majority of the main continent's experts were still experimenting with combining combat techniques with skills and spells. However, Shadowless Empire's members had already accomplished this feat, allowing their Tier 2 skills and spells to undergo a qualitative improvement. Just 30 minutes later, the Purgatory Giant finally went berserk. Shadowless Empire's members started activating their berserk skills, one after another in response. When Vast Lock and Night Reader activated their berserk skills, without even activating twofold berserk, their basic attributes already reached the standard of mythic monsters. As a result, they managed to endure the Purgatory Giant's berserk phase and eventually slew the mythic boss. Along with the Purgatory Giant's death, the magic barrier that protected the Cold Spring Forest started crumbling. The seal on the cave leading to the Cold Spring Forest was also removed. Meanwhile, beyond the cave, one could now see a snow-covered forest. After killing the Purgatory Giant, Shadowless Empire's members did not rest for long. As soon as they finished collecting the boss's loot, they made their way into the Cold Spring Forest. As they left, they glanced at the distant Zero Wing members with gleeful expressions. Haha. Zero Wing's members must be dumbfounded after seeing us defeat the Purgatory Giant. The Dark Berserker carrying a two-handed axe laughed. Although we got to show them the gap in strength between us, they now get to enter the Cold Spring Forest without putting in any effort, Night Reader grumbled. There's nothing wrong with letting them gain some advantage. Zero Wing is Starmoon Kingdom's #1 guild. Its influence also reaches multiple kingdoms and empires. If we want to establish a foothold in the main continent quickly, we can make use of Zero Wing's strength, Vast Lock said. After Vast Lock's words, Shadowless Empire's members no longer said anything. Instead, they simply focused on traveling to the Cold Spring Forest's inner area. Roughly 5 minutes after Shadowless Empire's members entered the forest, a deafening roar suddenly echoed throughout the forest. How is this possible? A grim look surfaced on Night Reader's face when a group of fully armed dragonkin suddenly emerged from the snowy forest ahead. However, what shocked her the most were the numbers and strength of these dragonkin. Dragonkin Fighter. Dragonkin Lord. Level 100 HP 63,000,000/63,000,000. Dragonkin Captain. Dragonkin High Lord. Level 101 HP 135,000,000/135,000,000. Dragonkin Warrior. Dragonkin Great Lord. Level 101 HP 220,000,000/220,000,000. The inferior dragons standing before their team numbered more than 1,000, and even the weakest dragonkin fighter had an aura that was no weaker than that of the Great Lord-ranked demonkin guards they faced before. As for the Great Lord-ranked dragonkin warriors, their auras were just slightly weaker than that of the Purgatory Giant. Moreover, there were 3 of them. Defensive formations. Vast Lock shouted. By the time Vast Lock gave his command, however, the dragonkin army was already charging at them. Although Shadowless Empire's members could barely hold their ground against the Lord-ranked dragonkin fighters, they were at a severe disadvantage against the dragonkin captains, inferior in terms of both basic attributes and reaction speed. When one of the Dark Knights failed to defend himself in time and got hit by the saber of a dragonkin captain, he instantly lost over 1/4 of his HP. As for the dragonkin warriors, Vast Lock and Night Reader had to coordinate with each other just to pin down one. Stopping the remaining 2 Great Lords was beyond them. Retreat. Retreat to the cave. Vast Lock shouted when he saw the 2 unfettered dragonkin warriors slaughtering his teammates. Retreating was now their only option. Otherwise, a team wipe was inevitable. As Shadowless Empire's members continuously fell back, they eventually came across Zero Wing's members, who had also entered the Cold Spring Forest. You guys hurry up and retreat. These dragonkin are much stronger than the lords and great lords in that cave. You'll die if you go up against them. Vast Lock warned as he looked at Shurfeng. However, as soon as the Dark Assassin gave this advice, one of the dragonkin warriors slaughtering Shadowless Empire's members shifted its gaze toward Zero Wing's team, which was less than 100 yards away from it. Squinting its eyes, it immediately charged toward Zero Wing. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. They're doomed. Night Reader could not help but look at Zero Wing's members in pity at this sudden turn of events. The dragonkin warriors possessed very high reaction speeds and intellect. These great lords posed an enormous threat even to Shadowless Empire's members, not to mention Zero Wings members. However, just as the Dragonkin warrior arrived before Zero Wings' team and was swinging down its saber, a sword light suddenly struck at it. Suddenly, the Dragonkin warrior let out a wheeze as its 4-meter-tall body shot backward like a bullet and crashed heavily into a nearby tree, the massive tree shuddering at the impact. Chapter 23:19, Tier 3? As if time had stopped, silence fell over the entire Cold Spring forest. Whether it was the Dragonkin or Shadowless Empire's members, they were all in a daze as they looked at the Dragonkin warrior that had collapsed before the large tree. At this moment, not only was the Dragonkin warrior in a heavily injured state, but its silver armor even sported a large cut. If one looked closely, one could even see the white, broken bones of the Dragonkin warrior beyond this cut. If not for God's domain setting that made it so that creatures would die only if their HP fell to 0, the slash from before would undoubtedly have taken the Dragonkin warrior's life. Even so, the attack still took away a large chunk of the Dragonkin warrior's HP. What did he do? Night Reader could not help her shock as she stared at Shifeng, the person who executed the attack on the Dragonkin warrior. Previously, when she used her trump card to attack the Dragonkin warrior, she had only managed to make it stumble back one step. Shifeng, on the other hand, heavily injured the Dragonkin warrior with just one stroke of his sword. For a moment she wondered if the main god system was playing a joke on her. After all, she was currently level 97. She was also equipped in 4 pieces of epic equipment and a top-tier epic weapon. In addition, she had a special legacy that increased her basic attributes and physique by a significant margin when fighting in darkness. Even the apex experts of super guilds were most likely no match for her when it came to basic attributes. Now, however, Shifeng, who looked very ordinary and gave off no aura whatsoever, actually surpassed her strength by several degrees. No matter how she looked at this situation, she simply could not bring herself to accept it. He is probably Zero Wings guild leader, Black Flame. According to rumors, he has already reached level 100. Vast Lock guessed as he looked at Shifeng, his evaluation of Zero Wing increasing by a grade. Even if he is level 100, there is no way he can have enough strength to send the Dragonkin warrior flying. We can't even if we activated our berserk skills, Night Reader said. Although the Dragonkin warrior was only a great lord, its strength was just slightly inferior to the mythic-ranked purgatory giants. Even if they activated a berserk skill, they would, at most, just match the Dragonkin warrior. In order to send it flying over 20 yards, they would need strength at the standard of mythic monsters at the very least. Of course, it's impossible just by reaching level 100. However, I suspect that he has already completed his Tier 3 promotion quest, Vast Lock said in a definite tone. Tier 3? How is that possible? Night Reader simply could not bring herself to believe Vast Lock's speculation. Previously, she already considered the rumor of Shifeng reaching level 100 a wild exaggeration. The Shadow World had much more abundant leveling resources compared to the main continent, yet even they, the top players of Shadowless Empire, had only managed to reach level 97. Now, however, Vast Lock was telling her that Shifeng had not only reached level 100 but also completed his Tier 3 promotion quest. This was unbelievable. The difficulty of promotion quests increased with each subsequent tier. The difficulty of the Tier 3 promotion quest was especially high. To complete the Tier 3 promotion quest, players would not only have to be of a sufficiently high level but also needed to invest a lot of time into making preparations. For Night Reader herself, even if she had made all the preparations she could, she still wouldn't be confident of completing her Tier 3 promotion quest. After all, experts of their caliber couldn't settle for a mediocre result in their Tier 3 promotion quest. Needless to say, someone like Shifeng wouldn't settle for this either. While Night Reader and Vast Lock were talking about Shifeng, the heavily injured Dragonkin warrior suddenly stood up and let loose a deafening roar, which echoed throughout the forest. Moreover, the Dragonkin warrior did not stop at just one roar. Instead, it repeatedly roared again and again. Did it get hit too hard in the head? Night Reader found the Dragonkin warrior's incessant roaring strange. Moreover, the injured Dragonkin warrior wasn't the only one acting strangely. Every other Dragonkin in the army also started roaring. No. Vast Lock's complexion darkened as realization struck him. They're calling for reinforcements. As soon as Vast Lock finished speaking, a deafening roar came from the depths of the forest. Following which, a commotion broke out in the distant forest, and very quickly, a huge swarm of dragonkin charged out of there. The newly arrived dragonkin numbered more than 3,000, including as many as 5 dragonkin warriors. "Run!" Vast Lock shouted, his scalp turning numb at this sight. At Vast Lock's order, Shadowless Empire's members immediately dropped what they were doing and fled for the cave they had come from without hesitation. However, despite seeing Shadowless Empire's members retreating, Shifeng and the others still maintained their positions. "Why aren't you guys running yet?" Night Reader asked as she looked at Shifeng. "We'll block them, so you guys should use this opportunity to retreat." "It is still too soon for you all to come here," Shifeng said before walking toward the Dragonkin army, together with Zero Wings members. Since Vast Lock had warned him before out of Gudv Karatal, Shifeng naturally didn't mind helping Shadowless Empire now. "You're crazy. Do whatever you want." Night Reader huffed when she saw Zero Wing advancing toward the Dragonkin army. She then turned her head away and left. Shifeng might have reached Tier 3, but he was only one person. He wouldn't be able to keep the several thousand dragonkin at bay all by himself. Not to mention 5 more dragonkin warriors had joined the fight now. Even if the swordsman could suppress these great lords, could he suppress all 8 of them? However, before Night Reader had gone 100 yards away from her previous position, she saw Zero Wings' team clashing with the dragonkin army. When the two sides came into contact, Shifeng initiated the battle by executing Void Slash, using the 6 slashes his skill generated to send 6 dragonkin warriors flying back and crashing into the dragonkin behind them. As for the 2 remaining dragonkin warriors, Kola stopped one of them while Turtledove stopped the other. Kola's strength might not be comparable to the dragonkin warriors, but with the fragmented legendary ranked Titan Guard and his Dragonslayer legacy, he neutralized all of the dragonkin warriors' attacks without fail. As for Turtledove, although she was inferior to Kola in terms of both defense and strength, she had Yen Tianxing assisting her from the side. Yen Tianxing influenced the dragonkin warriors' attacks, such that they all landed on Turtledove's shield and nowhere else. After seeing that all 8 dragonkin warriors were stopped, Alluring Summer, Ilofei, Zhao Yueru, and the other magical class players started bombarding the approaching dragonkin captains and dragonkin fighters. Like a mobile turret, Zhao Yueru sent even the High Lord-ranked dragonkin captains flying with her spells. With just one AoE spell, she created a large clearing amid the dragonkin army. Even the dragonkin warriors stumbled when struck by her attacks. Despite the severe numerical disadvantage, Zero Wings' 100-man team coped with the dragonkin army without suffering any casualties and relentlessly pressed deeper into the cold spring forest, suppressing the dragonkin army thoroughly. Dragon King fighters and dragonkin captains died quickly, one after another under Zero Wings' bombardment. "Crap. Are they even human?" An axe-carrying dark berserker who had already arrived back at the cave, cursed aloud when he saw the dragonkin army getting repulsed. He had had a tough time dealing with just one dragonkin captain, yet Zero Wings members were toying with the High Lords as if they were children. Zhao Yueru, Alluring Summer, and Ilofei in particular had devastated the several dozen dragonkin captains with their attacks, preventing the High Lords from reaching Zero Wings' rear line. Shifeng was even more frightening, single-handedly suppressing 6 dragonkin warriors. Let alone damaging the swordsman, the 6 dragonkin warriors couldn't even get within 5 yards of him. Their HPs also plummeted. After only a short moment, the 6 dragonkin warriors had already lost 1/10 of their HPs. At this rate, the deaths of all 6 were just a matter of time. How is Zero Wing so strong? After Zero Wing's team disappeared into the snow-mantled forest, Night Reader was in a daze for a long time. When she remembered how they had thought to prove their superiority over Zero Wing by defeating the Purgatory Giant, she felt a little embarrassed. She had never imagined that things would turn out this way. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Shifeng's performance in particular had shocked her. Every one of his actions was beyond her perception. If he had decided to contest for the Purgatory Giant back then, the consequences would have been dire. Most likely he could annihilate their entire 200-man team all by himself. Let's return now. Zero Wing is much stronger than we initially thought. The higher-ups will need to adjust our approach to Star Moon Kingdom, Vast Lock said after giving the matter some thought. Shifeng's strength was simply too frightening. He was no longer an existence Tier 2 players could hope to contend with. Moreover, the other members of Zero Wing also possessed considerable strength. With the guild definitely much stronger than ordinary major powers, Shadowless Empire would have to tread carefully in Starmoon Kingdom from now on. After saying so, Vast Lock turned around and had everyone prepare to leave the Cold Spring Forest. As for Night Reader, she turned involuntarily for one last look towards the direction Shifeng disappeared. So what if you're Tier 3? Just you wait. I'll catch up with you soon. At that time I'll show you just how powerful I am. I'll make you regret looking down on me. When Night Reader thought of the words Shifeng said to her before, she gnashed her teeth in anger and frustration, feeling as if she had been treated like a fool. Immediately afterward she turned around and left the Cold Spring Forest. Chapter 23:20 Level 100 Exploration Zero Wings members gradually advanced deeper into the Cold Spring Forest. As the map had never been explored by players before, the number of Dragonkin Zero Wings members encountered along their journey kept increasing. Fortunately, the number of Dragonkin warriors they came across did not, so the growing number of enemies did not affect the team negatively. It only provided the team with even more EXP. The EXP granted by level 100 monsters was far greater than that of level 99 monsters. Although Shifeng had brought Zero Wing's main force to grind at a level 100 Forbidden Land before, everyone's level had been very low. As they had to rely on Tier 3 demons to do most of the fighting back then, their grinding efficiency had been considerably low. Now that everyone in the team had the combat power to contend against level 100 lords, they made short work of the level 100 plus Dragonkin. As a result, everyone's experience bar increased at a very rapid rate. After grinding for just 6 hours, everyone in the team had already leveled up once. Now, even the lowest leveled player in Zero Wing's main force was level 98, whereas the guild's top experts like Yen Tianxing had reached level 99. As for Shifeng, he too had gained his final percent and reached level 101. However, in contrast to the team's leveling speed, the Dragonkin's loot rendered everyone speechless. Even the best piece of equipment dropped by the High Lord-ranked Dragonkin captains was level 100 Mysterious Iron rank. Moreover, this was from the first kill of these Dragonkin captains. Otherwise, the weapons and equipment they dropped would be only bronze rank. The quality of the Dragonkin captain's loot was far inferior to that of level 99 High Lords. Shifeng, however, did not find this situation surprising. After reaching level 100, ordinary experts would be able to gear themselves only in level 100 Mysterious Iron equipment. If they wished to get level 100 Secret Silver equipment through killing monsters, they needed the support of a sufficiently strong team. As for obtaining level 100 Fine Gold weapons and equipment from monster drops, that was absolutely impossible for them. Only Tier 3 experts would have the ability to grind for level 100 Fine Gold weapons and equipment. As for Dark Gold weapons and equipment, players would need both superb strength and luck. This was also the reason why, after frontline players reached level 100, the various powers of God's domain would start frantically investing in Tier 3 experts and Master Lifestyle players. Past level 100, quantity no longer mattered. Instead, what mattered the most was quality. One could say that Tier 3 experts and Master Lifestyle players were the true foundation of the various powers. Without Tier 3 experts and Master Lifestyle players, level 100 plus weapons and equipment at the Fine Gold rank or better would be inaccessible. Meanwhile, if a guild did not possess top-tier level 100 weapons and equipment, how was it supposed to develop? Level 100 plus monsters weren't easy opponents, especially after players reached level 105. Before reaching level 105, players could still rely on Dark Gold weapons and equipment that were below level 100 to fight monsters and bosses that were below level 105. However, that would no longer be possible at level 105. Past level 100, monsters would receive a significant improvement in strength every 5 levels. Without top-tier weapons and equipment of a corresponding level, Tier 2 players would not be able to contend with monsters and bosses of the same level at all. Only Tier 3 players would be able to. However, players capable of getting promoted to Tier 3 as soon as they reached level 100 were extremely rare. Moreover, although Tier 2 players might have an easier time completing their Tier 3 promotion quest as their levels increased, They would still require the assistance of top-tier weapons and equipment to succeed. Guild leader, I found a parchment that can't be appraised. Blackie said excitedly after picking up a parchment dropped by a dragonkin warrior. He then handed it to Shifeng, anticipation filling him. His appraisal had already reached the advanced standard and was only one step away from the master standard. An item that he could not appraise definitely wasn't ordinary. A parchment. After Shifeng used omniscient eyes to appraise the parchment, surprise and joy filled him. Not bad. This is a magic trap design. A trap design? Blackie, however, was disappointed when he heard Shifeng's words. How unlucky. I thought we got a design for a weapon or equipment. Traps were common in God's domain. Some players would even use traps to deal with field bosses. However, compared to magic arrays, traps were very much inferior. Some traps were even ineffective against monsters at Great Lord rank or above. However, Tier 2 players could easily deal with Lord-ranked monsters. Setting up traps to deal with a Lord would be a waste of time and materials. This is something very good, Shifeng said, chuckling. In any case, have everyone keep an eye out for it. If any more drop, bring them to me. Also, have Melancholic Side prepare the materials necessary for making this trap. Prepare as many as possible. Most likely, every player in God's domain had suffered at the hands of traps before. In fact, many experts had been killed by traps. However, as players couldn't properly utilize traps against monsters, traps never gained much popularity among players. However, traps were almost guaranteed when exploring ruins in God's domain, so how could they be useless? The reason for everyone's misconception about traps being useless was simply current players being limited to using and producing basic traps. The materials and production method for basic traps were common and simple, so it was only natural that they had very little effect against monsters. As for why players were capable of making only basic traps right now, it was because the main God system intended for players to slowly adapt to and learn about traps before reaching level 100. However, after reaching level 100, the main God system would remove all restrictions on players. Naturally, this included the limitation on traps, and players would be able to make intermediate traps. Not only would intermediate traps use much rarer materials, but their production difficulty would also increase significantly. In return, however, their effectiveness against monsters would improve substantially. Let alone dealing with level 100 lords, intermediate traps could deal serious damage even to level 100 great lords and place them in a heavily injured state for a short time. Moreover, traps were more suitable for the general public than precious magic arrays, as they were much less costly to produce. During Shifeng's previous life, many Tier 2 experts had relied on intermediate traps to hunt high-ranking bosses and grind monsters. If not for these traps, the majority of Tier 2 players wouldn't have been able to survive in level 100+ neutral maps at all. Meanwhile, the design the Dragonkin warrior dropped was for the Countercurrent Swamp, a magic trap that was effective against monsters below level 120. When triggered, it would not only immobilize monsters for a brief period but also reduce the reaction speed and basic attributes of the trapped monsters by 15%. Of course, the stronger a monster was, the less effective the trap would be against them. Even so, the Countercurrent Swamp was very useful against Great Lords below level 120. Past level 100, even Great Lord-ranked monsters were considered bosses. Ordinary Tier 3 experts would have to flee if they came across a Great Lord of the same level. Soloing the boss would be impossible. With the magic trap, however, even Tier 2 players could kill level 100 Great Lords so long as they had a sufficiently large team. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Alright, I'll notify the others about it, Blackie said, nodding. Even so, he still wasn't particularly interested in the magic trap. After all, he didn't believe the Countercurrent Swamp's effects could compare to those of a magic array. Following which, Shifeng had his team slaughter the Dragonkin armies that they came across. He did not rush to the Cold Spring Forest Central region. After one day of steady grinding, Shifeng obtained another 4 trap designs. 2 were for the Countercurrent Swamp while the other 2 were for a physical trap called Burning Fire. Physical traps had many more weaknesses than magic traps. For example, they were quite useless against flying monsters. However, physical traps also had very obvious benefits. For example, they could be used to target a group of monsters. Moreover, they could cause very high amounts of damage continuously so long as a monster remained trapped inside them. If magic traps and physical traps were properly paired up, even Tier 2 players could live a profitable life in level 100 plus neutral maps. They would be inferior to Tier 3 players only when it came to raiding dungeons. Meanwhile, after the team killed another level 102 Dragonkin warrior, a purple glow enveloped the bodies of many members as these people reached level 100. The invisible chains that previously bound these players also shattered. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.